Well, anyway, welcome. This is our final session together, and we are going to be focusing specifically on how the student role works in formative assessment. So, unfortunately, Javier, we're running up against end of the year things, I think. Javier can't be here because he is in an awards ceremony, although he did say to me that what he's been implementing in his class has been transformative. So I want you to know that. And I know Lynn has to leave early for her graduation ceremony. So we are running up against end of the year. Focusing in specifically on the students. So here we are, the third session. So what we're going to be focused on here is the student role, the way the relationships change in the classroom when formative assessment is implemented, looking particularly at self-assessment and peer feedback, and then we want to, I want to finish with giving you some ideas about how you might continue on this journey that you have begun this past 2 months. So that's the plan. Here are goals. I want you to understand the contribution of formative assessment to this idea of learning to learn skills, learning to learn. Hi Diane, welcome. Understand how to support students in providing peer feedback. Understand the value of self-assessment and how to support students to engage in the process. And then gain insights into how to continue your formative assessment journey, which I'm hoping that you will. And not just let this go as, you know, a period when you focused on this but didn't fully incorporate the practice into your classrooms. And then so for you to check your learning, you should be able to describe how formative assessment can assist students to take responsibility for learning and develop the learning to learn skills. And I'll be saying more about, oh hi Patricia, come in. I'll be saying more about that in a moment so that you understand. Javier's not here today, so maybe you want to sit with Wendy, Patricia? Oh, you're away from Wendy. Well, don't sit next to Wendy then. Explain how students can be supported to engage in self-assessment and peer feedback, and identify ways in which you're going to continue your journey. So, by the end of today, she's going to brave the germs, obviously. You're a compelling partner. So just take a look at those, because I want you to be thinking about that as you're engaged in these learning opportunities today. We'll close the door so we can be cozy. We're all here now, Mark, except Xavier. It's okay. All right, so here's our agenda. Although with this group, I never really stick to it because you're so disruptive. Homework, I want to really focus on what we mean by learning to learn and why we should care about it. Including students in the process of formative assessment. Then after the break, we'll spend time on peer feedback, and after lunch, self-assessment, and then finish up with how I'm going to provide you with some possible resources to continue your journey. Okay, so that's the plan. So time to share. So you were going to plan formative assessment opportunities in your lesson, obtain and interpret evidence, act on evidence, and report back. So anybody want to kick off sharing? Well, that's great. That's a great example. So check for pre-preparing questions. And you were on the webinar, weren't you, Nicole? Yeah. The ELA, and thought Becky did such a great job of showing how the questions connect to the goals and criteria. So if you weren't on, and Diane was on, Diane gets an award, Mark. Mark, I want to know, we're going to give Diane a special award. She has been to every face-to-face and every webinar. So
that puts her in the gold league. That's probably platinum.
Yeah, never mind this gold rubbish, platinum, definitely. Yes, well, congratulations, Diane. We certainly appreciate your commitment and your contributions. Oh, well, I'm glad to hear that. And for the rest of you who weren't on the webinar, I really suggest you go back and listen in for your particular subject area. We combined them this time. They're on the website, I believe, and they're really, really worth listening to and sharing with colleagues.
Will they be up this summer?
Oh yes, they will be up this summer. The webinars, Mark? Yeah, because it'd be nice to share with colleagues as well, or listen in with colleagues. Yeah, they're really well done. I've so appreciated having our subject matter colleagues' input on this. So thank you, Nicole. That's a great example. Any other sharing? Yeah, and I think a learning goal is distinct from a behavioral objective, because American teachers have been trained in these, behavioral objectives. Students will demonstrate, or students will identify. And my question is always, well, what do they have to learn in order to be able to do that? So there's a whole lot of learning underneath, and that's what we really need to get to. That's the sort of tip of the iceberg, being able to do it, but what do you have to learn in order to get there? Nice. So Hung's got the standard, compared to decimals to hundredths by reasoning about their size. The learning goal is students understand how to compare and order mixed numbers in various forms. So that seems to me to relate to the standards. And they can use their understanding of different ways of expressing equivalent values in order to arrange a set of decimal fractions in unit, fraction, and decimal form from greatest to least, or least to greatest. So then we have the tasks, and this is a template I gave you last time, the tasks and activities to help them meet the learning goals. So he's got a set of tasks that the students will do. You can see here, this is the first one. And then the second one is to plot all of these numbers on the number line. And then some nice questions. Look at your number line. How are your numbers arranged? In what order are they? I might add, why are they that in that? My favorite question that you constantly elaborate, why are they in that order? And then we've got another one. This is arranging mixed numbers and etc. from greatest to least. And again, how did you decide on the order of the numbers? I thought that was a nice question. And then a third one, and these build as I'm not a math expert, but it seems to me these build nicely, incrementally. And then use what you know to answer this question, demonstrate your reasoning. In what place did each student rank? How did you solve this problem? So those are the questions you'll be asking, right, as they are working on their... and then he's got the... See, to me, these are all your formative opportunities here, the tasks that you've given them to work on. So they're going to complete the problem, reviewing their solutions, and checking their work. So I'm not sure that I would call those but look for misconceptions or misunderstandings, that's great. But to me, these are your formative assessment opportunities as they're actually working on the tasks. And you've got some nice questions there. And then some questions. Which numbers were easiest for you to plot? Why? Yay! How did the number line help you order or check the order of? Do you think it could be useful to use a number line to order numbers from greatest to least? Why or why not? Great. And so on. So I thought you did a really nice job with this. The only thing I would say is for kids, I'd probably break down the success criteria into more of the component parts of what you've said there. And then I see these as definitely the tasks you've given them, and the questions you're asking around these tasks are your formative assessment opportunities. So I think you've done a really nice job with this. Thank you for sending it to me and for sharing. But I was thinking you could do that with any discipline, really, what you were saying, John. You know, put up, Charlie, I can imagine that, you know, you're putting up a primary source and they're looking at that and these are the claims, okay, I don't know how you'd frame the question, but still the same kind of thing. You're looking at exemplars to really get at what is quality and what's what's still needed. But you've got to have the kind of culture that permits kids to feel safe to do that, to sort of challenge a teacher and say, I don't know. Okay, well, those are all really great examples. I'm happy to hear that you're doing things in classrooms and you're seeing some results, which is excellent news. So let's get into the topic of the day now. You remember you've seen this slide before, that formative assessment in this broader conceptualization of assessment for learning is for both students and teachers. And students are, at the very least, equal stakeholders with their teachers in the assessment process. And if they're not, it's really not formative assessment as assessment for learning. It's teacher getting evidence and teacher doing something with the evidence, but the student piece is completely removed, which I think we've had some nice examples of student involvement already today. So, as we know, these guiding questions: where am I going? What's next? Where am I now? Oh, Diane. And where to next? And remember, the whole point of this is to close that gap between where I start at the beginning of a lesson and where I want to end up. And so here we are with our feedback loop, and we've been in the red zone, the blue zone, and now we're still in the blue zone, and the next where to next, but from the perspective of the student. So really looking through the student's eyes to close that gap. And so for the student then, the question becomes, I know what I'm supposed to be learning. For the student and the cable call, I know what I'm supposed to be learning. I know how I will know when I've learned it. And you know, I've started to add another point to this. I was doing some work in Michigan last week, and as I was listening to these people talk, it became really evident to me, which it should have been evident all along, that another question should be, I know how what I'm learning connects to what I've learned before, which goes back to your point, Dave, about the place value. I know how this fits with what I've learned before. How there's that connection. And so kids are seeing learning as a progression, that it's coming from somewhere and it's going to somewhere else as they get more sophisticated with their ideas. And then the idea of students generating feedback, internal feedback for themselves through self-assessment, because we want them to be active learners, and I'll say more about that in a moment. And then the ability to give peer feedback. Not just as a means to support their peer, but also I think what we're seeing a lot now is that students really get a deeper sense of their own learning goals, their own learning, as a result of thinking about somebody else's work, somebody else's learning. And then the whole point here is, can I take action to move my own learning forward? I mean, I think you, Lynn, in your class have already started that with, can I take action? Yes, I am the one deciding what feedback I need, because this is what I want to work on. That is being an active learner. And we use all these terms like active learner and taking responsibility for learning, but that is an instantiation, I think, of what we're talking about. We don't give too many examples, I don't find. We do a lot of talking at very high levels. But that is an instance of taking responsibility with the idea of I can contribute to my own learning. I know what to do. I have a range of learning strategies that I can apply and know when it's appropriate to apply them in what context. And so making students very aware of the strategies they're using as they're learning, so that they begin to develop that repertoire for themselves. So, here we have our famous beginning and end of lesson, and then the students are acting on feedback, whether it comes from themselves or from the external, from teacher or peer. But again, it's the student's responsibility to act on that feedback, and what is the teacher's responsibility in all of this? Very nice, yeah. So constantly deepening their thinking. And then the final part of this is giving them time to use the feedback. I think I said last time when we were talking about feedback that if you're giving feedback and you don't give students time to use it, whether it's from their self-assessment, from the teacher feedback or the peer feedback, then it really is a waste of time. You may as well not bother. Because it doesn't help students use the feedback to support their own learning and their own thinking. And that's the point here. Okay, so why should we include students? Well, here's a few ideas of why we should include students and why countries all around the world are really focused on what a lot of countries call learning to learn skills. Now, I'll give you my ideas and you can see if you agree. The Industrial Revolution is really when compulsory schooling started. Kids needed to have the skills to participate in an economy. They need to know, the 3 R's, reading, writing, and arithmetic. Most kids left school in elementary. That was that. But they did have the skills to be able to function in the economy as needed. Now, we no longer have an industrial revolution model. We have a technological revolution model. So, as I've said to you before, we're in a completely different paradigm. And if we look at this, what do you see here? You see somebody starting school, but continuing to learn all through life. That's what our kids are facing, this continuation of learning. At one time, like in this Industrial Revolution model, you could front load what you needed to learn in school. You could get by. If you could read functionally, you could do arithmetic functionally, and you could write functionally. You could get by in society. You need more than that these days. Society has changed dramatically. You need more than that. And I took this from The Economist last year because as we're in this technological revolution, and we hear this all the time about artificial intelligence, today robotics and artificial intelligence call for another education revolution. Okay? This time, however, working lives are so lengthy and so fast changing that simply cramming more schooling at the start is not enough. People must be able to acquire new skills throughout their lives. And I think we've all got the message on that. The internet is 20 years old. Look at how that has transformed our lives, even if probably not even quite 20 years old. And so I think we all understand that we're in this forever changing world. I mean, my husband, there's some new Google thing, I wish I could remember what it's called, but it's artificial intelligence that works with speech. And so you can have a robot call a restaurant, make reservations for you, make your air travel. And apparently, and he works in this area, he says it's unbelievable what they're doing. So, the idea that we can have these basic skills and go through life and be successful and have quality and earn money, I think is something that is of the past. And I also took this from The Economist because I think it's sort of scary vision for the future. Do we really want all these robots overtaking us so that we end up not being able to do anything? So my point, the basic point, the basic idea here is that we are in a different societal context. Unfortunately, much of our education is still within that Industrial Revolution model. We're not getting kids to think critically or creatively or metacognitively. We're not building problem solvers. I mean, again, I was just in Michigan with their State Department people and some of their regional folks, and they said that industry in Michigan, business has been beating the doors down for years about the skills that kids don't have coming out of K-12, that I think everybody now thinks are part of college and career readiness. These learning to learn skills. And I think this was well summed up. There's a research synthesis done by the National Research Council. It's called Education for Life and Work. Deeper Learning and 21st Century Skills. But basically they synthesize what is known, and this is a mega august body of people who did this, published by national academies. So they synthesize current research in the context of deeper learning, 21st century skills, and they identified these three buckets: cognitive, interpersonal, and intrapersonal. And I just want you to look at some of these aspects they identified. So if we look in the cognitive side, we've got, we've got critical thinking, adaptive learning, reasoning, argumentation, communication, active learning, creativity, problem solving, decision making, analysis. All of these are these cognitive skills that we need to be ensuring our kids have in this technological age. However, there's more. If we look at the interpersonal, and this is where business, industry, the military has been dinging us for years and years and years. Responsibility, collaboration, cooperation, conflict resolution, all of that. And then we have the intrapersonal, metacognition, thinking about one's own thinking, self-evaluation, self-direction, responsibility, self-monitoring. And then notice how these are all interrelated. So as students are learning, they're engaged in these three domains: the cognitive, the interpersonal, and the intrapersonal. So we want them to be metacognitive. We want them to think about their own learning. Going back to Lynn's example, they were being metacognitive. When she asked them, what do you want help with? They had to think about their own learning, their own thinking. We want them to collaborate. To develop the collaborative skills, and B, to learn. And then these are the cognitive dimensions that we need to focus on in our content areas. And I think if you've been on any of the webinars, you will have seen in these content, and you can't do this in a vacuum. It's done in the context of subject matter learning, but critical thinking, communication, reasoning, argumentation, you've heard that in every single subject area. So this is the new normal, folks. When I worked at Crest UCLA, we used to do assessments for the military. I wasn't part of the program, but a lot of the skills and a lot of the assessments were on, can you work as a team? If you're in a submarine that's sinking, what are you going to do? And the military hired us to develop assessments to focus on that, because they recognize that kids, new recruits, do not have those skills. And empathy, they don't have. You know, whatever your hypothesis is, that's the result. So this is a new normal. This is the outcome of schooling. We have a lot to do, but don't forget, I mean, I was applying, when I was in the UK, I was applying for principals jobs in the mid-80s. And I was writing about this stuff then because industry was telling us, hey folks, get your act together. Kids need to have these skills, negotiation, all of this to be able to function in the workplace. And that was, getting on 30 years ago now. So we're certainly in this situation. And I think these more and more are seen as the outcome of K-12 schooling, at least according to this august group. And if you look here, I mean, we've talked about a lot to do with this in terms of lesson design and working together, listening to kids, getting their insights into their thinking. And as we talk more about self-assessment, we're going to come back to this, which is I'm not saying formative assessment is the way to get to all of this, but formative assessment certainly supports the acquisition of these competencies. Mainly, and I think when they get into groups, the number of videos I've seen where people say, oh, they're cooperating. No, they're not. They're working quite independently. It's almost like parallel play with little kids. They're not cooperating. They're not collaborating to get the job done. They're not inputting different ideas for the collective good. They're just not. Yeah, there's not, and not structured it. Just say, get together and make a poster, which is what I've seen. Oh, good luck with that. Yeah, yeah, but you've built them, you've created that, you've given them the skills, and you've given them a structure to do it in. But I think there's no question, at least across the world, this isn't just here in the US we're trying to do this. In fact, many other countries, sorry to have to tell you folks, are way ahead of the game. But we want to ensure that at least they have the experiences and they have the competences. They know what collaborative work means. And it does not mean I talk all the time or I sit back and let my friends do the work. And that goes to the teacher monitoring as well. Yeah, both of them. Because, I mean, just because it happens, you know how to do it, Jennifer. A lot of teachers don't. Because we haven't, I mean, you know, in the 80s, this was a big push in the 70s actually, in the early 80s, there was a big push in Britain about, collaborative group work, cooperative group. And they did research and they found that the groups aren't cooperative. They're just sitting together. Anyway, John gets the last word, then I'm moving on. This is why I never get my agenda finished with this group. Yeah, no, those are really, really important. I'd like to make a distinction, though, between sentence frames and sentence starters / formulaic expressions. Because in the EL world, sentence frames really restrict language. And they're often given that, and it's more like closed procedure, fill in the blank, as opposed to what you're talking about, or what Becky was talking about, which are starters that provide, literally a starting point that students can add onto. And I've just been writing about that, so I'm particularly sensitive to the idea. And I think if you say sentence frames, that really is the sentence with a few blanks missing. Well, you don't learn language by doing that. I don't know what you learn. But as you say, giving a starter, an expression that you can use, as you said, Lynn, across the board, I think is really important in terms of developing cooperative, and especially when we come to peer feedback. Just for fun, as you know how we always, Singapore is one of the high performing on PISA tests. And I was just interested a few years ago, maybe 3 now, I think I've told you I'm part of this international network on, they call it Assessment for Learning. And it started with Europe and Australia, New Zealand, Canada, etc., the US. I've said those. And suddenly Singapore appears at the table. And I thought, well, this is interesting. And the Singapore, he was from the Ministry of Education, he said something really powerful, I thought. He said, what we are trying to focus on in Singapore is teach less, learn more. And several people were asked to say what was one of the main highlights of the meeting, key points they took away. And practically everybody from every country said, teach less, learn more. So I just thought for fun, they're revamping their education system and they have several tenets that they want their education system to uphold. I thought this was interesting. Have the moral courage to stand up for what's right. Pursue a healthy lifestyle and have appreciation of aesthetics. Are resilient in the face of difficulty, innovative and enterprising. Go back to those 3 circles. If that's not part of that, I don't know what is. Are purposeful in the pursuit of excellence. Are able to collaborate across cultures, not just within your own culture, can think critically and communicate persuasively. Well, and the Chinese, Shanghai, I've had several colleagues just come back from Shanghai who tell me they're interested in creativity. They don't want rote learning anymore, which they can do brilliantly. They want this. So this is about, but this is my point, this is about competing on the world stage. And I also want to make the point, because when I talk about New Zealand, people say, well, that's a very small country, America's a big country. Yeah, but guess what? American education is administered by states, state by state. And some of our states are very small. I mean, this one is big relative to even other countries. But I don't buy this argument. We can't do this. I'm not saying that's what you're saying. But I often hear that, well, it's okay for them. They're a little country. Yeah, but we have little states. You know what? Anyway, just for fun, and I think in a way, Hung, you've made my point for me, because they're seeing the way the wind's blowing, and this is what they want for their system. Same with the Chinese. So I thought that was interesting. So your interesting thought for the day from me, which we're not going to talk about. But if you look at this report from the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, now I don't know if you're familiar with this organization, but they're the sort of rich countries club. They're the ones that administer the PISA and the PIRLS, these international tests that we're also concerned about. And if you look at what the OECD said in a report in 2008, formative assessment promotes the goals of lifelong learning. This is 2008, this is 10 years ago, folks. Including higher levels of student achievement, greater equity of student outcomes, and improved learning to learn skills. Those learning to learn skills that we've all been addressing with the three buckets, those three domains that I addressed earlier. And so I think if the OECD says that, then we need to be paying attention. Because the OECD, their research arm, is a very rigorous body, and they're not going to publish anything which doesn't have a strong empirical base. So there you have it, folks. That is why we need to care about peer feedback, student involvement in the assessment and learning process, and self-assessment. So I'm going to rest my case on that, and hopefully that's given you enough basis to think, because sometimes I worry that people are, well, that's just a frill. You know, it's nice if you can get it. We're not in that game anymore, folks. It's an essential. It's not a nice if you can get it. It's a fundamental right of kids, of all kids, to have these skills on exiting school, those improved learning to learn. So including students in the process then. No, we're not going to do that because we spent a lot of time talking about that. I might come back to that video at the end, but I think we've covered a lot of what that teacher's going to help us think about. So this is from Sharon again. I've introduced Sharon to you with her math lesson plan a while ago, and now here's Sharon with another quote, that formative assessment has not only changed me as a teacher, I believe it's changed my students as learners. And I think that would be replicated by every teacher who's had something to do with formative assessment. That the responsibility, genuine responsibility for learning is placed with the student. We can help them learn, but we can't learn for them. Learning is the property of the learner. So what does it mean to change students as learners? Well, here are some of the things, just building on those three domains that we looked at. We want students to be able to set their own goals. And I'm going to keep coming back to your example, Lynn, because I think what kids were doing there was setting their own goals. This is what I want feedback on. Not you going to tell them everything they need to fix, but this is what I want feedback on. This is my goal. And ultimately, we really want them to be able to, especially when they're older, but even I've got some examples of younger kids setting their own goals. We want them to be able to decide what's next for them. Now, let me be clear, this doesn't mean to say the teacher takes a back seat. Obviously, the setting goals becomes a negotiation with the teacher. But at the same time, we want the kids, see the kids in the driving seat. Monitor their own learning while they're in the process of learning. And this is part of metacognition. We want kids to think about their own thinking, be metacognitive. And let me just say this. We know that from the cognitive literature that a hallmark of expertise is metacognition. Why do we not teach metacognitive skills in schools if we know that? Because why? Because we're still stuck in that Industrial Revolution paradigm where metacognition didn't matter. Doing what you were told mattered. So metacognitive skills, and the good news is they can be taught. And you can begin very young in teaching those skills, and we'll come back to that. This is just high level. We want students, part of that feedback loop, as they're monitoring their own learning through either self-assessment or being given feedback, we want them to be able to take action for themselves, to decide, okay, this isn't working for me, I'm not solving this problem, I'm not able to fix this, what do I do? And the answer is not sit in a bath of learned helplessness. That's not the plan. We want kids to be able to take initiative for their own learning. And so becomes responsibility for or agency in their own learning. Children being active agents in their learning, not passive recipients, that learning is something that's done to them by the teacher, with them being passive. So this is really what I see as the focus of formative assessment and how it can help students change from being the passive recipients, if we're lucky, of what teachers are saying, into much more active learners who are developing these learning to learn skills. These would come under the umbrella of learning to learn. And if you think about college, if you think about the workplace, because we're focused on college and careers, all of these are skills. You already have these skills. And we want to make sure that all your students and all the other students in schools develop those as well. Because you know what? I'm just going to make a bold statement. I believe this is an equity issue. I really do. I mean, it may be that in your schools where parents can afford to pay money to send their children to school, they're going to build a lot of cultural capital in the home, and they're going to be given opportunities to develop these skills. Maybe not. But there's a lot of other children who will not have opportunities to do this. And it's our job to ensure they do, working with families to ensure that every child, not just a privileged few, but every child is equipped to take their place in the college and the workforce post K-12. So like I said, to me it's not a choice. It's not just to me, it's to a lot of people. This isn't a choice anymore. This is about what it means to be effective in the world, and it's as much of an outcome as academic excellence. So what I'm going to do now is play you a video, and this teacher is somebody who, she's been working on formative assessment for about a year, maybe not quite a year, and she's got pretty good at collecting evidence. She's got pretty good at the teacher bit of it all. But now she's really trying to focus on the student aspect, the student agency in learning. And I want you to listen. It's a school in Arizona, very close to the Mexican border, high poverty school, lots of low-income families, predominantly English learners in her class. And I want you to listen to what she's saying and think about, first of all, what do you hear that she's trying to do? And then secondly, are there any connections with your practice that you hear there? So let's just listen to this video. Her name's Jessica Cull.
That I am really learning how to teach in a new way, incorporating the students' peer feedback and student agency so much more into my teaching. In the past, I did a lot more presentation style teaching where I talked a lot more and I did a lot more of the intellectual work in the classroom, probably. But now I'm really learning how to hand the reins over to the students so that they're the ones doing the intellectual work and they're the ones doing the heavy lifting, so to speak. And so sometimes that feels a little uncomfortable because you have to let go of your control a little bit and see what the kids are actually going to do and how they're going to react to the material. And so my planning has changed a lot. Instead of more focus on the activity and what I'm going to say, it's much more focused on what are the students learning and what are they doing with the learning, and then really thinking through what might they not understand and how could I question in a way to help push them towards understanding, as opposed to me presenting data or information and the students passively consuming it. So I've seen a lot of great things in my classroom, but it is a little bit of outside of my comfort zone in a productive struggle, positive kind of way, to help kids learn this way and for me to learn to teach in this way.
What do you hear that she's trying to do? And then are there any connections with your own practice or with teachers you see? let's start with the first one. What do you hear that she's trying to do? What struck you about what she said? What came up in your groups? But listen, I mean, when she talks about doing that presentation style teaching, which we've just said isn't going to get you to where kids need to be, that's an issue. So I certainly agree with that, and I'm sure everybody else does. That she's in that Piagetian sense, state of disequilibrium. Yeah, and you know, she's a graduate of the University of Michigan and came out of their teacher education program as well. And so, you know, I'm sure the University of Michigan teacher education program did not teach her to be a presentation style teacher. But what happens when, you must see it all the time in your work, you know, they come out of these colleges and with ideas and new perspectives on learning, and then they immediately morph into the culture, the prevailing culture of the school, which is presentation style teaching. I mean, the whole school is trying to change, the whole district is trying to change. The other thing is, you know, you get all of this subsumed, all of these different initiatives get subsumed under formative assessment. And I just want to underscore what Mark said. It takes time. But if you listen to what you contributed at the beginning, you know, you heard people not making great changes, but they were making little steps which were impactful. You talked about sharing the questions. Nicole framing the questions better. Hung has done his, you know, very nice lesson plan within that framework. You, Lynn, focusing on the kids being saying what they need feedback on rather than you being the one to be the determinant all the time. And that should also give you evidence when you know what they're asking for feedback. So it's having a big vision but small steps along the way. And we'll come back to that later this afternoon, because when we talk about, you know, going forward and ways that you can continue this work and hopefully engage your colleagues. I hope in this morning's session you have a sense of the why and the what. What are we trying to focus on? How can we'll go deeper into how formative assessment can help us get to those goals, although I think you already have a good sense of that. And why are we trying to do this? Because, you know, education has to respond to the world in which we find ourselves. So just to conclude, this idea about that comes from Jessica, the intellectual work of the classroom. Did you remember her saying that the kids are doing the intellectual work, where she was doing it all? The heavy lifting. And we want the kids to do the heavy lifting. They're there to learn. We already know this stuff. They're there to learn. So I thought that was a powerful statement. And the good news is that she's in a school where the principal is really supportive. The district is really supportive. You know, the principal works with her to give feedback on the lesson, on the kinds of things that she wants to have feedback on. So this has been a powerful experience for her. And she's now become, in Arizona, this is a while ago, she's now become one of the key voices in Arizona. And at every meeting, you know, the state puts on, Jessica's there to talk about her own experience, because she's very real. You must admit, she's very open and honest about what's working and what's not. But she's grown a lot and continues to grow. No, we heard you. So one of the things I want to put up here for consideration that I think comes from Jessica and is part of this new paradigm in thinking about teaching, contemporary ideas about teaching and learning, is that the nature of the relationships in the classrooms change. The traditional paradigm, you know, teacher stands up and talks, kids listen if we're lucky, they do worksheets and they do a quiz. And that might, you know, to you that might seem, okay, I've never heard of that. But I bet my subject matter colleagues here who go into schools, that's a very familiar focus of a lesson. And in that relationship, you know, is teacher, top-down, teacher and student. Whereas I think the kind of relationships we're talking about now in this contemporary paradigm, and that Jessica was really getting at, is moving from vertical to horizontal relationships across a class. So a horizontal relationship between the teacher and the student, So teachers have more of a collegial relationship. I mean, they're still in charge. They're the ones that still put the structure in place. They're the ones that still organize. It's not the teachers standing back, but it's a different kind of authority in the classroom. It's not top down. It's providing those structures, those opportunity for kids and guiding them along the way. And so teacher-student relationships change. And I think that was really nicely exemplified in the video I showed last time. I don't know if you remember it, with Angelica, the child who was getting feedback on her writing. And she said to the teacher, I would like your feedback. I nearly keeled over when she said it the first time I heard it. Using her teacher as a resource and not as the fount of all authority. And similarly with students, so the idea of student to student, that we're learning together. And Becky gave a very grim retrospective of college days. And that kind of, people can still be competitive, but you have to do it in the context of working with your peers in the community. Because the world doesn't work that way quite so much anymore. We're too dependent on each other. So I think this is what we're seeing in classrooms, and to really have peer feedback, this student-to-student relationship is going to be really key. And we'll explore that through some of the videos and ideas I'm going to share with you as we go along. That makes sense? I'm reluctant to ask you for any comments. Like, don't say anything, just nod your head. But seriously, does it make sense, that changing relationship? And that's hard for teachers. And, like Jessica said, it is, or Jennifer and colleagues talked about how losing the control, it's giving away that control. It's a different kind of control. You're still in charge, but it's a different kind of control. And I think that's frightening. I mentioned I was in Michigan talking to several groups when I was over there. And I remember one, I don't know where he was from, but had a suit and tie on, so I guess he was important. And he said to me, what accounts for teachers' lack of willingness to make these kinds of changes we're talking about? And, we've touched on that a little bit, but I think it's pretty scary. When you've been totally in control in this structured environment, to suddenly start to release, within a structure, but release and give the responsibility to the kids. It's pretty scary for teachers. So I understand that. But I think this is where we are now in this. This was our Industrial Revolution model. And here we are in our post-industrial revolution, technological, AI world. All right, so let's now dig deeper into peer feedback. We talked about the characteristics of feedback last time. Those characteristics are still the same for peer feedback, that we want to engage kids' thinking, give them an acknowledgement of something they've done well, suggestions for improvement, and I'm going to show you a couple of examples, one from high school and one from a second grade class. So you can see that even young children are capable of giving each other peer feedback. So what we know about feedback is, and this is a quote from Dylan William, and what he says is research shows that the people providing the feedback benefit just as much as the recipient because they're forced to internalize the learning intentions and success criteria in the context of someone else's work, which is less emotionally charged than one's own work. And I see this a lot, and I'm sure this resonates with you as you have seen kids giving peer feedback and then go, oh yeah, I need to, as it just jolts their thinking in terms of their own learning. And so this isn't a frill, it's deepening, it's both deepening learning for both participants, and it's also building those competencies under this umbrella 21st century competence. So I prefer learning to learn. I mean, can you give and receive feedback is one of the aspects that we're trying to foster here. And so if we think about peer feedback, first of all, it involves thinking about learning. That's important. Again, I'm going to talk about how it needs to be taught. This isn't just something kids emerge on the planet being able to do. It needs to be taught. It involves thinking about learning. It deepens students' understanding of learning goals or learning intentions. It can support self-assessment. Once you've started to, I know some teachers will introduce peer feedback before self-assessment because they think it sort of leads kids into the idea of self-assessment when you're doing it for someone else. And it fosters collaboration. And certainly when we talk about it needing to be taught, Lynn's not here now, but those kind of formulaic sentence starters are key to helping kids learn how to give feedback. So these are some of the ideas around feedback and why we should care about them under that umbrella of learning to learn. And I wanted to share with you, this is from Arizona, and I'm sharing that with you because I've done a lot of work there with a research project of teachers really focusing much more on student agency and through self-assessment and peer feedback. And actually, somebody needs to remind me that I developed a continuum for this project, which I want to share with you. I hadn't thought about that. Jennifer, can you remind me that I need to do that?
Like before the day ends or what?
Yeah, yeah, thank you. So we went and we interviewed some of the students, and it was so fascinating what the students said to us. First of all, they know the classrooms, they know the teachers who give them this sense of agency, and they really appreciate it. And they're able to describe, not in any kind of negative way, but just objectively describe their experience of being in a particular teacher's class versus being in other teachers. And one of the things one student, a high school student, I'm going to show you some video of them this afternoon. One student said, I don't know anybody in my other classes. I never speak to anybody. I've been sitting next to this student this was in January, for however long, and I've never spoken to the student. I thought, wow, you know, and it bothers them. Whereas in this other class, they learn together, they get a lot from learning from and with each other. So this was some 5th grade students, and I was quite intrigued by some of the quotes from. I follow the success criteria to give feedback to my partner. Don't you just love that? And honestly, we were just interviewing them, and I pulled these quotes from the transcript. Success criteria is a useful tool. It helps me know what to look for. You must share this with Lynn, because she teaches 5th grade. Feedback helps me know what my next steps are. Oh, how about this for agency? Sometimes I disagree with the feedback. Then I have to decide what my next steps are. Talk about control of one's own learning, agency, taking responsibility. That's the same. I told you, I do a lot of writing. I get a lot of feedback. Sometimes I don't agree with it. And that's me, but I can decide if I agree with it or not after I've thought about it. And that's, again, kids. It's not saying I don't want the feedback, but I don't always agree with it. So I thought that was pretty cool from 5th grade. Here we have some 9th grade. This was a science class I observed. In my science class, we go through cool feedback, incorrect things or things you can fix, and warm feedback, what you did well. Cool statements are more helpful because it makes you think outside of your own mind. Don't you love that? And these are regular kids. You know, we're not handpicking these. We just pulled some kids from this 9th grade science class, and she was doing a very nice job, this teacher, in his school. And this is from 11th grade. Oh, this I love. The beauty in being able to collaborate with peers is that they have experienced the same struggles as you in completing the task at hand, which enhances their ability to give you honest feedback. What do you think about that? Now, let me ask you, if you were an employer, wouldn't you employ these kids? I mean, talk about college and career ready, thinking outside your own mind, you're getting another perspective. Isn't that what we want from education, being able to handle other perspectives, giving you honest feedback. They've experienced the same struggles as you. I had another 11th grader, I don't think she's on the video I'm going to show you, but she says, you know, getting teacher feedback is important, but also students have different experiences, and their experiences are closer to mine. So I find my peers' feedback really valuable. So that's from the words of students. And then this was a kindergarten teacher. Actually, this was the same kindergarten teacher in the same school that Jessica works in. And what she said, I wasn't sure if peer feedback applied to kindergarten, but it's amazing what they can do. Students are used to going on cue. They're waiting for you. Well, that needs to change. And then this peer feedback practice is stretching them to think themselves for how to present to their neighbor and how to give feedback. Don't you love that? Think for themselves. Hooray. See, it just goes to show, do not underestimate 5-year-olds because they will amaze you. So what struck you? What are some ideas that have popped out for you? I mean, I know I've been giving you editorial comments along the way. That's fundamental, the success criteria, to giving feedback. In fact, I remember I was in Iowa about 5 years ago, and we were doing things, and like I did with you, the teachers had to say, what have they been doing? And she said, well, I tried this peer feedback, it doesn't work. So I thought, oh, okay, let's just go over it. So I said, well, all right, well, let's think why it hasn't worked. First of all, do you have the success criteria? No. Well, go figure. I mean, I didn't say that. Don't do checklists. Checklists are not about feedback. In fact, checklists are checklists, about ticking things off. So don't do. Exactly, and that's the point of feedback. Just as when teachers give feedback, what's going well, where are you meeting the criteria, where are you close to meeting the criteria, and what do you need to move forward? Because remember, the whole point of this is to close that gap. So this is yet another way of helping kids close the gap. And yeah, I think that's a great strategy. And the nice thing about what you've said, it's not a one size fits all. People have different needs, which is again why I like the idea of asking kids, what do you need feedback on? What is it that you think? So, so nice. But it does underscore again, going back to Wendy's point, the what are you doing well and where are areas for improvement? And Nicole, I would suggest to you, you need to spend more time with the students actually focusing on what peer feedback is. And the criteria, as you rightly said, are the first, you know, because the whole point of this is helping kids to meet those criteria. Yeah, if they don't have the knowledge and the capacity to do it, yeah. So these are important nuances to be thinking about as you're planning for peer feedback. Anything from our subject matter colleagues here? Do you have anything you want to add, or keeping quiet? Good. I wanted to show you this. This was a classroom. This is a first and second grade combined classroom, and the teacher posts a lot of work, and you know, this follows on, the reason I put it here because it follows on this idea of young children, and this is around the class. Student work is posted, and you can see they're been decomposing 3-digit numbers here, and they have post-its, and you know, kids can go and look at each other's work. And I wouldn't say these are great models of peer feedback in terms of sophistication, but you can see the ideas emerging. Jalal, he's a little boy whose work this is. I like the way you did this. Can you move to the next step? That's awesome. She's heard that. Or whoever's given him the feedback has heard that from the teacher, talking about your next step is. Now, can you move to the next step? Probably Jalal doesn't know, but you can see he's kind of trying the peer feedback on for size, getting the idea of what it is. This is, what do you mean, Lenny? I like your strategy. Lucia, I really like the way you decomposed. I love that, from Arthur. Lucia, oh, and he's given here, so Arthur's done a nice job, because here, Lucia, I really like the way you decomposed. And then Lucia, is there any way you can use more numbers? That is a first grader. Now, Dave, are you happy with that? Because if you're not, you should be. I mean, if we can get first graders talking to each other like this, then I think we're in good shape.
I'd love some of my high school students to talk right.
Yeah. And so what they do is, it's based on what they're doing well and determine potential next steps. So this is the most developed, but you can see that the others are on the way. They get the idea of what they're supposed to be doing. Now, why are the children able to give each other this kind of feedback? Well, I think it's, the learning goal will be there. Yeah, it's totally decodable. Yeah, and the learning goal, if we're learning to decompose 3-digit numbers or whatever, would be there. And so they can certainly, in fact, in this class, when parents come in, drop their kids off in the morning, they also have post-its for parents, so parents can provide feedback. And I was because I actually go to, this is my little research lab, because I go there a lot really to see evidence-based practice of formative assessment. So I was there one day and some kids were chatting by some of the parent feedback, and I said, oh, I see some parents, yeah. And they said, actually, that's not feedback. And I said, oh, okay, so why isn't it feedback? Well, because it's all praise. It tells us what we did well. There's no next step. And so they were very censorious about that. There was no next step. Like how do...
Parent or the kids?
The kids were censorious about the parent feedback because they said it wasn't feedback, because it didn't provide them with how they can progress, how they can move forward.
Just said like, oh, that's good.
Oh, that's great, and oh, this is wonderful work. They don't buy that, these kids. I remember taking some professors from the University of Wisconsin around the class a while ago, and you could tell they didn't believe that little kids could do this. They were of that stripe. And so one of them said to one child, so what is feedback? And I thought, oh, yeah. And textbook answer from this kid. I mean, I nearly wrote it down because I would have put it up there, and absolutely, they know what it is, they know the value of it, they know how to use it, both from the teacher, but as I mentioned, this comes from an awful lot of teacher modeling, an awful lot of teacher modeling. So, it needs to be taught. Nicole, listen up. Right, you've got your criteria. So first of all, you have to provide the ground rules, that nitpicking isn't part of feedback. This isn't what we're here to do. We're here to think about each other's work, identify what they're doing well based on the criteria, which is another reason why kids have to internalize the criteria so they know what it is that they're focusing on. And then you make a suggestion for improvement. And lots of teachers, especially for younger kids, have little heuristics like this teacher has a PQS. So should they spend weeks and weeks introducing the P, which is a put-up, what you're doing well. And so that will be, they'll probably spend weeks on that, practicing it, giving feedback on, the teacher gives them feedback on how well they're doing. Then the next part of the feedback strategy is Q, a clarifying question. I have a clarifying question for you. And then S is the suggestion. This is how you can move forward. And they have their little PQS, they have little PQS cards that they can write on. This is this class, the one I just showed you previously with the student feedback. So it needs to be taught. Provide ground rules. It's not about nitpicking, it's not about being critical, it's about support. And of course that all feeds back into the idea of classroom culture. Because if your culture's not set up, if it's in the Becky college mode of dog eat dog, then it's going to be very hard to give each other feedback. Well, I think nitpicky can be focus, but I interpreted Nicole to mean nitpicky as sort of in a more negative connotation. Maybe I was wrong, Nicole. Yeah, and they should be going into that level of detail. I'm going to show you an AP class later.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
They should be doing that. So, but I was interpreting what Nicole said as more of a negative connotation. But yeah, absolutely. If you go in for the detail, you want, you know, this is rigorous. We're not just, oh, this is la la land. Oh, I love what you've done. Great. Now go and write another sentence. That's not what we're about here. And of course, as you point out, Nicole, it's going to change. The nature of the feedback will change. I mean, your kids should be giving each other detailed, sophisticated feedback, right? So introducing stages. These are just some ideas of things I've seen teachers do. So introducing feedback on exemplars. You know, you mentioned, John, earlier about providing student work. So working as a class, what feedback would you give? Here are the criteria. What feedback would you give this student? So they practice as a whole class. Now, this isn't a one-off lesson. This is a lifetime of improvement. So you might start in the early years, but you continue to monitor, to refine as kids go through. Model and discuss effective and ineffective feedback. So when you, the teachers could provide a model on the exemplar, what's effective, what's ineffective, and why. So they're beginning to, and these are things that, as I said, are ongoing part of the classroom work and classroom teaching. Teacher modeling, I've said enough about that. That's a really big one. Templates for scaffolding peer feedback, like I mentioned, the PQS strategy, or one I'm going to show you later. I think I might have shown you this classroom. Yes, because I remember Jennifer commenting on how busy it was, the environment. They talk about a star and a step. What's your star? What have you done well? And what's your step? What's your next step for improvement? So giving them these little heuristics to latch on to. And then practice and monitoring. It just goes on and on forever.
Can you say what the PQS was again? I like that.
The first is a put-up. That's part of their school culture where, you know, they're really encouraged to give each other put-ups. You know, what have you done well? Questioning, a clarifying question. You know, I wonder what you meant or whatever. And then a suggestion. What's the peer suggesting as a next step to move forward closer to the goal, to meeting that criteria? Or it might change if it's their clarifying question. But again, I think it's, you know, the idea is to sort of get kids to engage in thinking together. And don't forget, you know, they're working around the same ideas, the same criteria. The other thing I haven't put on here, and it goes back actually to what we were talking about earlier with kids just looking at these hand devices all the time. The teachers of younger children, and I've learnt it from my colleagues in this school where I go a lot, they actually model and they do role play and they do fish bowls. I may well come back to that because I think it was in the video I passed over, where they model what it looks like, what it sounds like. They have lots of sentence starters and then they model. And the teachers will even model with the children sitting, so you're looking at one another, eye contact, the kind of voice you use, and the role play, and then the kids do a fishbowl, so they give each other feedback on how well they were giving feedback and so on. So it becomes really very much embedded in the life of the classroom. And it's not something you can ever lose sight of, ever. So this needs to be taught, it needs to be monitored, it needs to be refined. So every teacher needs to put this on their agenda as something that's part of their teaching and classroom focus. And you can start with little children, as that kindergarten teacher said. She was just amazed what they can do. What they can do. Although, I just have to tell you this story. Back in Arizona, I was in this school, and I forget what the program is, but maybe some of you folks know. It's where the kids have to sit with star posture. Are you familiar with that? Oh my God, you don't want to know, believe me. So I go in this 5-year-old class. Oh, it's like a straitjacket that you have to sit like this, you know, like a ruler up your back and your legs in a certain way, and the teacher goes, star posture, and they're like 5-year-olds. And so I wanted some videos, so some peer feedback. So somebody said to me, well, you should go to this school. They've really been working on peer feedback. So I go to this kindergarten class where, of course, star posture got me. So once I got beyond star posture, then they were sitting in rows, in pairs, in rows. And the teacher, they had these 3 crayons, and the teacher said, right, we're going to do peer feedback. Raise the red crayon. Literally, this was it. So I'm thinking, I'm going to turn the video camera off. I don't want any record of this. Now, use the red crayon to underline in the first sentence any mistakes. Okay. Now raise the yellow crayon. Use that to underline any mistakes in the second sentence. And so it went on. They had 3 sentences and 3 crayons. That was it. I nearly died. I just thought, who said this? And then the principal came in and she said, oh, I'm so glad you're here. Isn't it wonderful what they're doing in this class? I turned myself into a liar that very day. Oh yes, the children are very, very well behaved. So, and we're not talking about that. Does that engage thinking? No. What does it do? I don't know what it does. All right, so I'm going to show you now a high school. And you've already seen this class. Do you remember the graphic novel? I don't know if all of you were there for that, but I showed it right at the beginning, the graphic novel, those high school students in Canada, where they were, they'd worked on developing the success criteria from the exemplar text. So now they've done drafts, and they're at the point in the lesson, I think it must be the 2nd class period, where they are giving each other peer feedback. So I want you to notice how the teacher has structured. Jennifer gave us a nice example of how she structures peer feedback. So how has the teacher structured it, and what are the characteristics of peer feedback? So you should be making notes as you go along. I want to see people with pens or keyboards. What are the characteristics of the peer feedback that you notice in this? So it's that back to that class. I told you that I would return to this class, and I'm as good as my word. So you ready with these 2 questions?
Peer assessment of your drafts, and you will be providing descriptive feedback to fellow classmates so that we can go back and revise our drafts and come up with our final product. What I would like you to do now is pick 1 member from each group and rotate in a clockwise fashion around the room. And you will explain your rough draft to the group. They will tell you at least 1 thing that you have done well in your graphic text, 1 thing that needs improvement, and some next steps to improve the overall graphic text. After we've finished a full rotation of all the groups, I want you to get back into your groups, and we will provide you with time to debrief all of the critical information you have on this peer assessment sheet to work together in groups.
I was just talking to Ashley about the plot. It starts out really well, and it's building, and then all of a sudden, like, this frame happens, and it just doesn't make sense.
So there's a problem with transitions.
So I'm going to put that under needs improvement. You want to have a logical sequence of ideas, so that to get to the implicit, ultimately you have to have the reasoning that builds.
So you're saying that there basically always needs to be a logical connection between the explicit meaning and the implicit meaning to the reader.
You can really make the connection. So after adding maybe a few more pictures to build that transition, you can have someone else read it.
What exactly do you think you're missing in the transition?
I think it's definitely the motivation. Like, it just doesn't make sense why we can do that.
Yes.
And the message, because of that, the reasoning isn't clear, the message doesn't sound clear.
Okay, yeah, I get that.
You can do some foreshadowing. So maybe you just I don't know, knives by his bed or in his pocket or in his bloodstain somewhere, and you think that it's because he's a doctor, and it like drops hints. And then with each one, you can add something else that foreshadows one murder, because that's your message.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
What I'd like you to see you improve on is your next steps in terms of how we're going to improve the overall flow of the story from this scene to this scene. Now we're going to look at different strategies to improve our writing. Debrief these sheets. How are you going to implement the descriptive feedback to move to the next stage, which is going to be your final product?
What they thought we needed more of was that we need more thought transitions. So in order to make the story more fluid,
I don't think we should like take away too much from the mystery of the character. So then I think we should just add like some subtle details.
so I guess that would be adding more frames into the story.
So how's it going so far?
So we needed more transitions to improve the clarity of our meaning.
Okay.
So we were going to add in little details in between our scenes.
Another thing you want to do is maybe at the end add a quote.
Yeah.
So just to tie in the entire message really well, just as an ending quote.
Make sure that you're linking your goals to the success criteria. What I want you to do right now is set an individual learning goal, okay? So what do you guys have to do to take the story to the next level?
And for next steps, we need to add more characterization and more detail. What do you guys think?
Yeah, but I think we should focus on spacing out the action.
It's going to be one panel per page. So the panels will be bigger and the story will be much easier to follow.
So has the descriptive feedback been helpful?
Since we wrote the story, when we illustrated it, it made sense to us, but then we realized that some of them were kind of dense.
Okay.
So if we spread out some of the panels and added more detail, it would be helpful for the reader.
What I'd like you to do right now, jot down one overall goal for improvement that you need to focus on, and then I'll be back to check up.
So I think like the biggest point is still just to like break it up into smaller frames. So that
we have to convert this disorganized 2 pages of rough work into a coherent and good-looking final product.
Any other points?
Our second goal was to add frames to show the doctors, our main characters' normality.
Okay.
So basically it ties into the success criteria of panels directing readers across the story so that it's more fluid and the story makes more sense graphically and visually.
And then the last thing we wanted to do was add a quote at the end. Because that basically ties into the very first success criteria for the allegory, which is we, the author, we intend to communicate a meaningful message, and so by adding a quote, basically we're nudging the reader forward towards the meaning that we're trying to convey.
Now what I really like about this is you've tied in the suggestions for improvement to the success criteria.
In fact, like all our goals are based from the feedback we got from our peers.
Yeah.
What Ashley shared with us after she rotated around the class.
Right.
That's exactly what we tied into our goals and
Okay.
the links.
So the questions are, how does teachers structure those opportunities, and what did you notice about the characteristics of that peer feedback? And anything else you noticed as well. So I'm just going to give you 2 or 3 minutes to chat about that in your groups. That's a very nice observation. I showed this to my Michigan crowd last week, and they referred to it that it wasn't a mediating question. And I hadn't heard that before, but I like the idea of it being a mediating question. And I think what you pointed out is how it wasn't a mediating question. It didn't mediate between the work and their thinking and how to help them think. It gave them the answer, and that's always what we want to avoid. Yeah. So I like that notion of a mediating question. It's the first time I've heard it, and I think it's a really nice lens to have on questioning. And I thought that was a really powerful part of the structure that he'd enabled, that when you come back, you've got this array of feedback. Now what sense are we going to make of it? And are we actually going to use it? Going back to that 5th grader, I have to decide if I agree with it and if I want to use it. That's part of the thinking process. Nice. Entertain it and consider it. Yeah. And we'll come back to that this afternoon when I show you this AP high school class, because they talk about, well, I won't preempt it, but it'll resonate with you based on what you've just said now. Exactly. Any other thoughts on the structure, the characteristics of the feedback? I think that tying it to the success criteria is a really critical part of it. That does become the guide, the what am I trying to say? The structure for the thinking, for the learning. We're all geared towards these success criteria, and don't forget they've spent a long time internalizing those in the first part of the lesson. Goals, yeah, that's a nice balance. And did you notice that one student, it goes back to what Jennifer said about considering the feedback. It wasn't that they were going to take it, oh, we've got to do this. I mean, there's some pushback in a couple of the groups that well, I don't know that we need to do that. This sense of, I think what we're doing is fine, we can take this bit, we think this will improve, but maybe not this part. And he still wanted to keep the quote and was able to tie it very nicely back to the success criteria. So I think that shows the success criteria and the power of that, and also those kids had learned how to give feedback. And the other reason I like showing that is because, like Wendy picked up, that teacher isn't perfect. There's some definite points there where you think, could you just back off a minute, please? And maybe some more mediating questions rather than this rather top-down that sometimes he comes up with. How could you see that working in science or math? I think social studies is probably easier because it's more akin to ELA. How could you see that process working in science and math? Nice idea, but you better make sure that that is one of your success criterion. A success criterion, yeah. Because remember, you're only giving feedback, going back to my graphic, the goal, the start, the goal, and the feedback is used to close the gap. One strategy. So, like the idea, provided it's part of the success criteria. And unfortunately, we don't have another session, and I'm not coming to your school, Nicole, to find out. But I would really like to hear about how it improves when you focus on the teaching a bit more and more on the success criteria, because I think it'll pay dividends for you. So we're going to go back down the K-12 spectrum into second grade. And I'm going to play you some feedback from two students. And you've seen this class before. This is again in one of the school districts in Arizona, Jennifer Daniels. And I want you to think about not just the nature of the feedback, but what makes it possible for these students to give each other feedback. What has happened in this classroom and what is happening right now that makes it possible? And this really goes to the idea of the teaching and the whole setup. How does what's happening in this classroom support? And they're giving feedback to each other on their reading fluency. That's what they've been focused on, and they're reading to each other and giving feedback. And this you'll hear them talk about the start and the step. So you got what I want you to think about, what it makes it possible for them to give each other feedback.
You didn't read choppy and then you didn't read too fast or too slow. But your step is to, when you said no, you kind of paused right there and then just kept going. So you read like the character, everyone except for this part. Or they tried to, I don't know if it was this part or this part.
Yeah, I remember hearing me not real expression of this part. So yeah, it's probably this part.
So I think that's all you need to work on. Thank you for giving me the feedback. Was I being honest or do you disagree with someone?
I agree.
With all of it?
Yeah.
Did you understand the feedback?
Yeah. Can you read it first for me so I can give you the feedback?
Mayor Mac made new rules about cleaning up trash. No open trash this. Tess, you've got to be kidding me. I can't handle this. I've got to eat something. And soon, said Josh. Don't worry, said Chip. I've got a plan.
Well, you did read with meaning and expression, but you read kind of fast. Like, you read the whole thing fast, but you were doing good though.
So do I have any stars?
Yeah, the star is you were reading with expression and meaning this whole paragraph, and this one kind of, but yeah, that's my feedback for you.
So I understood the feedback. Thank you for the feedback.
Yeah, so that's all you have to work on.
Couple of minutes. What made it possible for them to do that? And that was just picked up by the cameraman, by the way. It wasn't staged. Well, and again, it's part of the culture of the classroom. They probably, had been told to give honest feedback because this is about improving. We're helping each other learn and improve. But that's been taught. It's been modeled. It's the expectations of the classroom. It's going back to the culture. It's all there. And, Wendy, the word you didn't actually use, Wendy, was success criteria. They knew the success criteria, what their teacher had taught them constitutes fluency in reading. And, this is something they're working on all year, obviously, but they understand. And when I was in there, they went over the criteria again and spent time discussing it. What does it mean to read with meaning? What will it sound like when you're reading with meaning? It is, and that's why I keep coming back to it.
You don't even have to open a book.
Over and over. No, it's going slow to go fast, because if you get all this in place, then it reaps dividends in terms of you can really reap the benefit of formative assessment if you have a conducive classroom culture where kids will talk to each other like that, they understand the criteria, they understand what their role in the learning process is. That's really perceptive, Jennifer. I thought it was so profound when he said, yeah, it was this bit here that I need to, that he was monitoring, he was doing that internal self-monitoring while he was reading. So before I send you off to lunch, just by way of concluding, I want you to sit with your own thoughts for a few seconds and come up with one word that sort of captures where you are, or not where you are, but captures what you will really be thinking about over lunch. Just one word. So this afternoon then, we're going to do two main things. One is to build on what we discussed this morning with respect to peer assessment and move that into the realm of self-assessment. And then we're going to spend a bit of time looking at ways in which you can continue to this whole journey that you've embarked on, minus having to come to these sessions. So I'll be sharing some resources with you that will hopefully be useful for you and ultimately for your colleagues. So let's start off then with self-assessment. And I just want to go back to our three domains of competence for, I guess, 21st century learning is what they call it. And this morning we looked at the interpersonal in terms of responsibility, collaboration, cooperation, teamwork. I think we saw negotiation in terms of that peer feedback example. So you saw a lot of those skills or competences being supported. And this afternoon we're going to look at the intrapersonal, what's happening within the student as they're engaging in cognitive learning. And if we look specifically here, we're focused on the self-monitoring, which we talked about a little bit this morning, responsibility, self-evaluation, and metacognition. And those are the pieces I wanted to pull out for us to focus and think about with respect to formative assessment. Okay, so does that make sense to you, what we were seeing this morning in the interpersonal? And now we're focusing on that aspect in the intrapersonal. And it's not to say that formative assessment can do all of that, but rather that formative assessment can support and contribute to the development of these competencies. which is another good reason why we should be interested in it. So here's another one from Sharon. This is actually in the book on page 4. And I love this quote from Sharon. I used to, but now I used to do more, but now I do less. Because so much evidence is gathered with formative assessment, I may do 2 or 3 very targeted tasks in an 80-minute class, rather than lots of good stuff. Now I work hard to save time for student reflections rather than filling every minute with activity. And I particularly like her notion of I used to do more, but now I do less. And one of the other things she told me was that she used to think, and I think I've told you this already, but I think it bears repeating, that she used to regard her students as engaged. Oh yeah, I look at engaged learners all around the class. And really what she decided in the end, that they were just doing busy work. You know, they were actually doing what they were supposed to be doing, but it was just busy work. It wasn't engaged in any kind of deep thinking. And so she really shifted her practice to focus on, you know, rigorous tasks, in-depth tasks, and save time for student self-reflection, rather than all this busy work of activity, moving from one to the other, which characterize a lot of lessons that I've seen. So, involves metacognition. And what did I tell you this morning? That metacognition, in terms of cognitive science, is the process of reflecting on one's own thinking, and is a hallmark of expertise. And if it's a hallmark of expertise, we need to be teaching it, folks. We just do. And we don't. But you probably are, and you will do even more after this afternoon. So we want kids to really be thinking about their own thinking while they're in the process of learning. And self-assessment, it's not that self-assessment has to wait till the end of a project and you suddenly say, oh, I'm going to assess myself on how well I did. Self-assessment, it can take place at any part of the learning process. In fact, it should take part of any part of the learning process, because we want kids to engage in that constant monitoring. I'm sorry Becky's not here, because she's had to go to the doctors, but she'll be back. What we do with reading comprehension, what are we all doing when we're reading? We're being metacognitive. We might not sit there and think, oh, we're being metacognitive, but we are, because we expect the text to make sense to us. And what do we do if it doesn't? Reread. We have a strategy. We might reread. We might have to sound out a word. You know, we do things because we're monitoring our own comprehension, even though it might be very, very, almost as a subconscious level, it's not. We expect it to make sense, and we have strategies if it doesn't. And that's really what we want children to be thinking about during the whole learning process. Where I know Fran, which I also found a very helpful comment on one of the webinars, said that really, and it might have been in this session, either way it was Fran that said it, that we are really focused on sense making with kids, not just filling them with information, but what we want them to do is to engage in sense making, so they're constructing their own understandings with our support and by engaging with others. So it's really the construction of understanding that we're trying to engage kids with. And so what we want them to be thinking about in relation to the criteria, and the criteria once again are really important for this, is my learning moving forward? Am I getting there? Am I stuck? What do I do? So there's this conscious, very overt, active thinking about one's own learning while you're engaged in the process of learning. And that's something for you to think about with respect to your own students. How metacognitive are they being? What opportunities do you give them for being metacognitive? And how do you support that, the development of those skills? And like I said, the good news is these can be taught. It's not something that we have to say, oh, well, kids either get it or they don't. It can be taught and fostered just in the same way that we've been thinking about peer assessment, how you do that. So it really becomes a routine part of what goes on. And that's what Sharon was referencing, that she stopped filling the lesson with a whole series of activities rather than substantive tasks with self-reflection. And so metacognitive activity, self-assessments as part of that metacognitive activity is something that kids need to be supported to do, given time to do, and encouraged to do by teachers. Again, going back to my 3 domains, we've seen it very clearly identified as one of the core competencies for 21st century learning. So what does it do? Well, first of all, we want them to be monitoring learning, and this other piece here is taking control over your own learning. Going back to this notion that I keep harping on about, that kids do the learning. And I think sometimes teachers forget, and you know, I'm including myself in this, that it's actually kids that do the learning. And you know, Wendy pointed out that teacher this morning, and Jeannie said, well, it could be because he was rushed, that he didn't ask a mediating question, instead he told. But if we're going to make sure that kids do take control over their own learning, we're going to have to really step back in our own behaviors and support this metacognition so that kids can really take ownership and learn for themselves. So it involves setting goals. We saw that this morning in the video, the high school video, they were setting goals. And even those little second graders, they were in the they didn't say, I'm setting a goal, but they had a step. This is something that was their goal to work on next. They were adapting their learning tactics or their learning strategies. So instead of just sitting there, checking out or waiting for the teacher to help and do it for you, we've got to have kids who are active, who know a range of learning strategies and when to use them. Why? Because that's what they're going to need in college and life. Remember that lifelong learning? They're going to be focused on learning throughout life. And so what we've got to work on with our students is helping them be aware of the learning strategies they are using to complete particular tasks so that they can actually employ those in other settings as well. So we want this repertoire of learning strategies. Are you with me? Is this making sense in terms of what we want for that active involvement of the students actually doing the learning, not as preempting the learning, like that teacher had the opportunity to ask that mediating question and didn't, and so took it away from the kid to actually learn that for themselves. So that's what we're doing in Needs to Be Taught once again. We don't land on this planet with metacognitive skills. First of all, kids need to understand what it is and why it's important. Why should I be learning this? Why is it important for me to think about my own learning and to be monitoring that while I'm learning? And children, you know, as we know and as we've even said in this session, kids can understand complex ideas if they are communicated to them in ways that are understandable. Given their age and stage. What are the purposes? What are the benefits? Why should I care about self-assessment? Is this just yet another thing the teacher's asking me to do? Why is it important for me? And so they need to understand that. Why is self-assessment? If you were explaining to a child, let's take a middle school, somehow between elementary and high school. What would you say the benefits of self-assessment? Why they should learn these skills? Why they should care? Why they should be engaged? What would you tell them? It's a life skill, whether you're in work or you're in college or wherever you are, being able to think about your own work. If you've got a job, am I doing it right? Am I completing it as I'm supposed to be doing? You need to be thinking about that. Those are all great reasons, and I think kids will find that pretty compelling. They need to understand, and in fact a lot of teachers need to understand this, is that it's not about the right or wrong. We're not looking for the right or wrong. And in fact that's something that could be equally applicable to peer feedback. And I love what you said this morning, Dave. I've got to remember this phrase, solution pathways. I thought that was a really nice phrase, solution pathways. Because people talk about, well, what strategies did you use? It's not really about strategy, it's about your solution pathway. which includes your thinking and why you approached in the way you did. So I think that's really nice. Because it's about thinking, it's about developing your thinking, not about zooming into the right or the wrong. So they need to understand this. The reason I don't like this idea of mastery of skills, because it says to me, and I can be corrected by my, not my elders, but certainly my betters, that it speaks to me of these discrete skills. You know, you master this, check, then you're going to master something else. Whereas I think learning is as a progression, it's almost a spiral. You know, like the waves, you go forward and then you go back a bit, then you go forward a bit more as the tide comes in. So I don't know, maybe it's just, it's a very American thing, you know, this mastery learning. It's not, where I grew up, where I was wired up as an educator, we don't talk about that quite so much. It's much more, you know, you're increasing sophistication, you're moving along this continuum, and you've got to be proficient in some things to be able to build on them. But maybe it's just my connotations of mastery. Maybe that's not what you mean. Okay, so let's stay on track then. Not about the right or the wrong, about learning and improvement. And I think that's important for students to understand. And, you know, going back, Nicole, to your students, they need to understand that in the peer feedback, it's not about the right or wrong. What did you do right? What did you do wrong? But how are you meeting the criteria? And then what can you do to move forward? So I think that's important. Again, teaching, modeling, scaffolding, critical that you teach it what it is, model it and scaffold it. And I'll show you some ways in which teachers have scaffolded peer assessment through those sort of templates, heuristics that I shared with you for peer assessment. Practice and monitoring, and when I'm talking about scaffolding, I'm talking about the kind of assistance that you give kids so that ultimately it becomes part of their independent achievement. And you're absolutely right, you've got to know, again, it's the match. What's the appropriate scaffold that I'm going to provide for the students, either in the conversation, the tool, whatever, that's going to assist them to get where I want them to be. Yeah, so thank you for that. And again, the practice and the monitoring. You know, you need to have conversations with kids. How did it go? What are you thinking about your self-assessment? How were you able to use this? What part of the lesson do you feel that you use self-assessment? How did it help you today? So all of these conversations need to be occurring to keep it in the frame. And really, it needs to become this idea of self-assessment. It's not, oh, okay, we're all going to stop and do self-assessment. In the end, it needs to become part of their DNA of learning. It's just how they learn and what they do. And because you're all successful college graduates, you all do this anyway, but we want to make sure that all our students are able to do this, all of them, going back to that 21st century competence, and this is what you need to learn. So any more additions? Dave added something very nice to that, so thank you. Any other thoughts that, oh, the modeling. I just want to say that think aloud is really important in the modeling, that you do a think aloud for the students. This is how I was thinking about my writing, or this is how I was thinking when I was solving this, or when I was making a prediction based on the phenomena we just observed. This is what I was thinking. So think alouds, and even asking kids to verbalize their own metacognitive thinking. And it's part of the thinking, what shall I say, the thinking, I had a word but it's gone, the thinking building that we want. We want kids to be able to think critically, creatively, and metacognitively. Those are the three dimensions of thinking that we need to be encouraging in our students. See, these are really good techniques for metacognition. You know, checking your work, reading aloud, all of this. That's why I don't like the term mastery, because you haven't mastered something. I'm sure, you know, that you're constantly refining and improving it. And that, I think that's part of the, you know, the growth mindset, that it's all about continuous improvement. You never stop learning. You're always in the process of improving and developing and growing. Good. Anything else to add before we move on and actually look at some practice of self-assessment? to underscore, it doesn't happen. You've got to teach it, you've got to support it, you've got to model it, you've got to provide opportunities in the class for this to happen. And I have remembered about the rubric, Jennifer, so you don't need to remind me, so that's already, I've remembered. I've got it all done, yeah. All right, so we are now going to look, and this is at a video, and your questions are for this video, what stands out for you? And this is an AP class, writing class in, again, Arizona. I know a lot of my videos, but my more recent videos are from this focus I've had over there. And so as you listen to these students, what do you really notice? What stands out for you? And then what I want you to reflect on with your partners, why it stood out for you, or several things, why they stood out for you. Okay, so ready to go.
The self-reflection we do in class definitely helps a lot within our feedback because it helps you target what you really need to focus on, and what you find is an issue for yourself may not be apparent to the others. So when you're talking to like somebody else and you want them to read through your paper, they may point out a different issue that they find that way, and then at the end when you do the second self-reflection, you're a little bit more sure and you can say what you know how to do with it rather than what somebody else says, which you may think isn't the best method of fixing it.
I also think doing a self-reflection in the beginning and the end of class kind of helps you figure out where you are and then how much you actually got from the discussion. So for example, in the beginning of class, you really have no idea, which was me in the beginning of this class. But then after the discussion and after reflecting, I'm like, oh, I really did learn a whole bunch of stuff. I really did get stuff from my peers, since like having those discussions really do help you understand.
On Wednesday, you looked over and created an outline for how you would answer this prompt. I'm going to ask you to take a moment, and I want you to self-assess where you're at with the understanding and execution of this prompt. So take, not in one sentence, that's not telling me enough, but in a few sentences, where are you at right now? If I was going to make you write the essay, how are you feeling with this prompt? Okay, so kind of assess your content knowledge and how you would execute that prompt.
Besides logos, what kind of strategies does she go to, or like what else does she go to?
I mean, historical certificates do most everything. It's just you're just looking at the devices. So like whether or not she uses illusions or like different kind of dictionary theories.
Wait, you guys, tell me if this is fun. Okay, I understand that the writer's message is indirect and the strategies they use are clear. The article talks about the contradiction America makes on themselves with their obsession with flamingos, yet they still have the desire to hunt and kill them. Is it? That's what the article's saying, though, because I feel like I'm still confused.
That's what it says. In like what devices you think you know?
Okay.
And she just makes everything seem big.
Look back on this sheet that I gave you today, the reflection one. And I want you to take a moment to answer the second question on there. So from our discussions and from now listening to how other people would answer the prompt, kind of getting feedback on questions you still have, I want you to take a couple minutes. How has your learning kind of changed? Or basically, what are you going to apply that you heard in discussion to the essay if you were going to write the whole entire essay?
I didn't completely understand the prompt. Now I do. Now I do, but with my outline, it didn't really work out. It's the same way. Yeah. So where? I understand now that you're trying to find the different strategies, I guess, that she used for essays. Yeah, I didn't know that. So
how does the author get to her purpose? So just like when we did Chavez, like how did he get to his purpose? And this one is hard because one, you have the reaction of, it's a flamingo, like what? But there's a lot of inference that goes along with it, which makes it challenging. Yeah. So what strategy are you focusing on?
I think imagery and diction, because those are pretty, they're used a lot for the article or the essays.
And then how would you tie that to purpose?
Like she's kind of making it with the words that she's using. She's making it seem like America has blown it out of proportion, I guess. With like, especially the words she's using, it's kind of out of proportion.
Well, I like what you said earlier with the whole like advertising time, or like the cheesy, like almost those cheesy infomercials, like the flamingos. I think that would be a good thing to incorporate there. And I think with the formative assessment and really paying attention to peer feedback and self-reflection, it puts a lot of the learning on the student to really take ownership of their own learning, and they're in charge of their writing, and whether or not I agree with their decision to answer a question a certain way, if I can, if they're including evidence and we're having that discussion, the level of critical thinking has already improved way beyond what I ever used to do as a younger teacher. In today's lesson, where they turned in, just one body paragraph after this whole process of class discussion and individual reflection and peer discussion, the quality of what they're turning in is so much more than I imagined it could be, and we're only on our second rhetorical analysis.
Okay, so there you have Julie Eiliston from Arizona, and I'm going to give you time in your groups to just react to that. What stood out for you, and why did it stand out for you? And it's interesting that you should say that, Dave, because I have a couple of little anecdotes about that class. The first one is the four girls who were talking at the beginning, the one who said, I realized I actually did learn something from my peers. We had Julie come to a conference in Arizona. Julie's a teacher, and she brought along 4 of her students, and that young woman was one of them. And she actually made that point. She said, look, I'm smart. I know I'm smart. I've always been smart. I'm in AP. We know we're smart. And she said, this is the first year where I haven't cared about my grade. What I care about is my learning. And you picked up on that point immediately. I thought I was going to have the Kleenex round to the rest of the room. They, because AP kids are focused on the grades. This is what they want. Like you said, the points, the grades, and this girl said, for the first time in my school, and this is 11th grade, for the first time, I care about my learning. And I thought that was pretty powerful. Yeah. But honestly, I've lived in this country for nearly 30 years. And this is the first time anybody's picked up and said, where are you at, isn't right. And in fact, I have a colleague, and we wrote a book together a few years ago, and she put in, when teachers are asking, where are you at? And I thought, well, it must be okay. I mean, it drives me crazy, because it was the kind of thing that my mother used to jump up and down about if I'd say it. Yeah. But the other story I wanted to tell you about Julie, is that I interviewed a lot of her students, and they're the kids who really know the difference in her class from the other classes. And this was her first year teaching AP, which is maybe, Jennifer, why she wasn't doing what you thought she should be doing. But she decided, because it was her first year, and if her scores bombed, people would say, yeah, so what, it's her first year. So she decided to take this risk of really, and 180 degrees. I mean, the kids only get feedback on what they want feedback on, and all the aspects we've been talking about. And so she was really worried, and as the year went by, this was last year, as the year went on, she said, I think my kids are doing incredibly well, but I am a little worried now, tests getting nearer and nearer. So after the tests results came out, I had this email from her. It started, "I am crying," and I just thought, oh, what have I done? What have I done? With joy. She aced not only her school, and it's a high-performing school in a high-performing district, she aced the district AP. Her kids were absolutely top of the pile in their AP scores, the whole district. And so I said to her, "So Julie, this is so exciting. I'm sure your colleagues are going to want to know what you did and want to learn from you." And she said, and so when I said that to a group of teachers recently, they said, "No, they won't." I said, "Come on." Anyway, you know what the colleagues said to her? "You had a good group that year." Anyway, I think to come back to our culture, you know, that what I talk about, that quasi-collegial relationship, you could see that with the teacher. I've got lots of instances of her on video, having conversations with kids about their learning. Not telling them, but engaging, just as the way we saw the elementary teacher in the previous week. Now I have a video for Wendy. I put it specially in for Wendy, and she's not here, so we'll wait till she comes back for this. But anyway, you saw self-assessment, peer assessment blended together there. So I want to show you a few ideas. I mentioned that teachers often give templates or some kind of scaffolds for students. Now this goes back to Sharon and her lesson. Do you remember about the coordinate graphing lesson? And these were the success criteria. And she does this every time, at the end of every lesson. So she has, these are the success criteria, and the children, her sixth graders, look at this, and they identify where they think they are relative to the success criteria. Now, any group of students can do this. And you can see this little kid, he's a 2, he's a 4, he's a 2 against the criteria. After this lesson, I feel like I need more time learning, and he's put graphing. That's what he feels he needs more time learning. That's his graphing. However, there was another child called Melanie in that class, and Melanie was a little pistol. And Melanie had scored herself 5, 5, 5, nothing, I got it all down. And Melanie had. So what's Sharon going to do? She's got he who needs a lot more support, and she's got Melanie. And believe me, if Melanie's not challenged, Melanie is going to be swinging off those the lights. So what does that tell you about moving from where the kid is to where the student can go next? Really important in terms of matching what you're doing to where the student is. Yeah, that's in the book as well, Diane. That's there. So I think this is a very easy one. Sharon uses them all the time. She says every lesson, and at the end of the class period, she just has a look around and think, oh yeah, that fits with what I saw, that doesn't fit with what I saw. Now I need to go and have another conversation with the child tomorrow. So that's just one way of giving them a structure or a scaffold to support. Now this I took from, you know, my very favorite Shell Center lessons, this math, and I think this can be adapted. I'll have to get a bit closer because I think this can be adapted. So this is about group work. So this is one lesson. So the direction is mark the boxes, circle an option, and complete the sentences that apply to your work. So our group work was better than my own, yes or no? This is because. I love that. This is because. So why is it better or why is it not better? In our solution, we checked, I could have checked, we checked, or I could have checked our work by. So articulating how you went about checking your work, or how you could have checked your work. And this is a bit difficult to follow. Our solution is similar to one of the sample responses, or our solution is different from all of the sample responses. And then our solution is similar to the student's name. I prefer our solution and the student's solution because. So I particularly like that. I'm interested to know what Dave and Hung think about it as our math people here. But I think it's a really nice way of structuring some thinking about assessment, about self-assessment within a group process. I thought that was very effective. Oh, I'll look at that. I didn't know that. Because I just love these lessons. I mean, they're my go-to. I actually use them across all subject areas because I think they're very helpful in how they embed formative assessment in the actual lesson. But again, just to show you a structure, here's another one, and this is from the UK, so you'll see again weird spelling. And I think this is something that you can have, you can certainly adapt it, but this is a way that you can keep coming back. A student could keep coming back to this. So I do not understand any of this yet, and the power of the word yet there I think is really critical. There are things I could do to be a better learner next lesson. Okay, so if I don't understand it, what might I do? And again, it's I. What might I do? Not what the heck is my teacher got to do? What have I got to do? Next, I tried hard and listened, but I'm finding this challenging. I will make sure that I get help with this next lesson. Once again, putting the onus back on the kid. It's my responsibility. It doesn't say who I've got to get help with, from or what I've got to help from, but I'm going to get help. I understand some of this, but I don't understand all of it yet. I can get to the right answer, but I don't understand well enough to explain it yet. And then finally, I am so confident I could explain this to someone else. And I think the intention of this is it's used on a continuous basis. I mean, if the kids, I'm so confident after one lesson, fine. But this shows you there's sort of a development, really. You know, if you have got help, then do you understand all of it? Some of it, but all of it? Or can you get to the right answer, but I don't understand it well enough to explain it? Wouldn't it be great if all kids were able to be thinking this way? Yeah, I can get the right answer, but don't ask me to explain how I got there. So I like that. I didn't know how to change. I think you can handle British spelling. If you don't say where are you at, you can certainly handle British spelling. This is a second grader, a child with quite a lot of social emotional challenges. But this is her reading log. And what they have to do every time they do independent reading, they have to set their goal for the day as a reader. And so you can see that here she said, my goal for a reader today is to make predictions of what's going to happen next. She's reading Mummies in the Morning, I think. Yes. And there's the pages to make predictions, or predictions, as she spells it. Goals for today's reader, get through the tricky spots. Now, what happens when a teacher comes to her and discusses what her reading? Where do you start? You start with, did you meet your goals today? Yes. Well, how do you know? If you didn't, why do you think that is? What help do you need, or what support do you need to meet your goals tomorrow? Or what were the tricky spots? What did you find tricky? Why were they tricky for you? So you're building that metacognitive thinking, but you're also getting it as a formative assessment opportunity. And this kid's, I mean, her spelling is terrible, but who cares? It can improve. My goal is to talk back to the book with a schema sentence stem. I know they talk about schema in this class. I'm not quite sure what it is. Yeah. But nonetheless, I mean, I think these are pretty sophisticated goals. I'm going to stop when it doesn't make sense, because you're right, Becky, these do indicate that this is a more challenging book for her. and to get through the tricky spots. So she's obviously found a lot of trickiness here. Now she wants to get through the tricky spots. But you know, she's reading quite a bit each time. But not only is she building this conception of what it means to set your own goals and be metacognitive, but it also provides the teacher with a great opening for formative assessment, a great opportunity. And you know, what I've shown you here are not subject specific. They could be used really in any context. You know, what's my goal today in math? What's my goal today in science? So at least they have a goal and they're thinking about their own learning. Absolutely, and this teacher does use its formative assessment, and this is part of their class work. They actually have to spend time talking about their goals, and maybe they'll share out the goals, and there's a class plenary where they talk about, well, who met their goal today, what, you know, so they're actually doing some sharing together. So, but the point being, as you rightly point out, that it's elevated into something that's important, and is a great formative assessment opportunity when you're having reading conferences. And, you know, they are trying to achieve their goal. I mean, the other thing this teacher does is, this is in-class reading, so this isn't homework. This is in-class independent reading time. And then afterwards, they have what they call reading buddies. And they spend time with their reading buddy talking over their goal and where the degree to which they thought they met the goal and why. So that's just part of the, you know, the reading workshop that they do. Independent reading time, setting the goal, and then thinking with a buddy how well they thought they met the goal. As an AP English teacher, you're happy to see that. Building that, okay. And then this one, this is, you must have seen this before, this idea of traffic lights. This is good for, I mean, I wouldn't expect your high school kids to be doing this, but it's a nice way for first and second, third grade. I actually saw this very well used once in a third grade math class. You know, these kids were actively using them. So the idea is that if everything's going, you have your cups on your desk. If everything's going well, you're showing your green cup. If you're a bit iffy, you show your yellow cup. And usually if you've got a yellow cup, you're talking to a peer, or you're looking at a book, or you're going across the room to talk to somebody and get some help. And then if it's red, it's like, I really need to speak to the teacher. I really need you, teacher. And this teacher spent the whole lesson just monitoring the class with the cups. But the kids were making the determinations of who came. This is something you could definitely use, Wendy. You could definitely use this with your kids. I mean, beyond third grade, I wouldn't necessarily use it. Although somebody did tell me in one session I was doing a few years ago, he taught shop, and he said he had, you know, when they were working on car engines or some mechanical thing they were doing, they'd actually have these different cards, and they'd put them on the place where they felt they'd really fixed it well. This, they were a bit iffy, and this, they really needed some assistance from the instructor. And that was, you know, career tech or college, whatever it's called. So I think that's quite a good strategy. But again, this is all ways of structuring it, giving them a scaffold to do this. And you know, older kids, if they can use this kind of thing. This I've actually borrowed from Dylan William and Siobhan Leahy's book. And this is a kind of a nice learning log that you can fill in at the end of a lesson. Again, this is at the end, and I just want to underscore we're not leaving everything to the end. But, you know, I'm not sure about what I like most about the lesson. I want to find out more, the most useful thing I will take from this lesson. That's a good question for kids, or a good statement for them to fill in. I was particularly interested. One thing I learned, I was surprised by, I might have learned more if. And that articulates, this maybe is a British thing, because I might have learned more if is a question that came from these two, and they're British. And the other one I showed you, the colouring in the arrow, is British. So maybe in British schools there's a big focus on, I might have learned more if I'd done something. So this is just another way of, you know, there's many, many different approaches, but I think these kinds of templates are very useful. But of course you've got to give them time to use it. Bearing in mind though, the ultimate goal is that kids are doing this for themselves. That's what we want. So that ultimately, you know, they don't need this. It's just something that they do as part of how they are a learner, especially when they're in high school. So I put this in for Wendy, especially, because Wendy has special needs students. And I put this in because I think it's a powerful video. This student has significant cognitive disabilities, as you will see. And this teacher teachers in his school are really focused on helping kids, to the degree that they're able to do it, to develop these competencies. And so I'm going to show you this one video of self-assessment, and think about, you know, what this teacher was doing to really help. You've seen some structures here, some scaffolds for kids. Look at what's going on in this. So Wendy, this is in your honor.
Are you ready? All right, so we're going to go for the what? The 3. Try it. Look, 3. Good job. Let's find the 7. That's right. Look, 7. Where's the 7? Yes, good job. All right. Let's look for the 9. Let me see where it is right here. Touch 9. Yes, good job. Good job. All right, try again. Come here. There it is. Come here. Let's finish up. Okay, you ready? Look, 8. 8. Touch 8. Good. Very good. All right. Here you go. Last one. Very good. Try again. And look, enter. Find the same. Great job. Hey, high five. High five. Come on. Great job. Okay. All right, let's go. I know. Come on. Come on. Come on. Good job. Good job. All right, Jason. It's time to stop and reflect. Touch stop. Say stop. Stop. Very good. All right, you're gonna tell me what you think about putting in your lunch number today. Okay? Yeah, that's where you put in your lunch number. Good job. All right, you're gonna touch or circle. Which one do you want to do today? You want to circle. All right. Yeah, you're gonna circle your answer. Okay. Are you ready to start? Which one's yes? Try again. Are you ready to start? Yes. All right, circle. Beautiful. That was a beautiful job. Look around, please. Oh, my paper's getting stuck. Okay, here we go. Ready? Okay. Did you need help today, or did you not need help putting in your lunch number? You need a little bit of help today? Okay, let's circle that. Good job. All right. All right, tell me how you did. Did you do it all by yourself? Did I need to repeat some directions for you? Did we do it try again? Did we do it together, or did you just need a lot of help? You think one? Huh? Yeah. Did I have to move your hand? Yeah. Okay, if you say one, let's touch one. Okay. That's what you think. Okay. I'll put that right here for just a second. Okay. We're going to come back to this page. All right. Do you like that is? Do you like using your book or not like using your book? That is you. You like using your book or not using your book? Which one? You don't like it? You do like it. You tricked me. Then circles. Great job. Great job. That is you. That is you. All right. Tell me how you're going to do tomorrow. Do you think you're going to not need help, or do you think you're going to need a lot of help? Which one? You think you're going to need some help? Okay. All right. All right. Now we're going to hold off on that page for just a second. Okay. These are your numbers for today. I want to write them out. Okay. Ready? Okay. Look right here. And down, please. All right. Which number do you see more of? Try. Oh, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate you shutting that for me. All right. Ready? Put that in. Okay. Which number do you see more of? 2 or 4? Look right here. There's 2 2s and 1 2 3 4s. Which one do you see more of? You see more 4s. That's right. You want to circle your answer? Okay, you did more 4s. All right. So which one is 4? That's right. So most of the things you did today with your number, you did all by yourself. Hey, look at that. You did all by yourself. Do you feel really good? Do you feel really good right now? Yeah. Yes, because you did much better than even yesterday. Hey, look. We're not talking about the dog. Look, you did a 4. You had more 4s today, which is really good. Really good. Hey, that's very good. All right. All right. Good job today. High five. Guess what? We are what? Stop. We're finished. Good job. Good job.
So, what did you learn from that video that can apply to your own teaching? I know you don't teach students. I don't think you as a students have got severe cognitive disabilities, Wendy, right? Yeah, but you actually told them what they'd done well. I mean, I think Nicole's point is well taken. And if I were to talk to that teacher, and, you know, I was given this video by some special educators who work with students with severe intellectual disabilities, and I would ask her, you know, because she's really working with this child or this young man, I guess he is, and I would ask her, does she feel that she could tell the student at least what was a good job? Because that's what you did, Wendy, right there. Although with a 3 and 4-year-old, I would say I really like the way you're putting those blocks carefully in the box, you know, because A, it's developing language, and B, it's giving them ideas about, yeah, this is why I'm doing a good job, because look what I'm doing, and so I'll do it again. Yeah, but I think it's a really good question, Nicole. That would not be appropriate in a general education classroom for feedback. And I suspect that if you ask that teacher and really had her think about feedback, that she may want to say to him why it's a good job. I've shown that with a lot of special educators, and nobody's brought up that question. And it may be because of his disability that's what she needs to be doing. I don't have the expertise to tell you, but I'm certainly going to ask, based on your question, people who do have that. Yeah, he was able to accomplish it in, you know, with a tremendous amount of support. But he did it. He did it. And, you know, I don't, as I said, I don't know what kind of cognition was going on there, but at least to my eyes. And I've actually seen it without the sound. And it's really interesting. You can, because you know, you're not hearing any language, you can actually see what he's doing. It sort of focuses your attention on what he's seeing, and he definitely is pointing in the right places. It's not, you know, it's not chance. It's greater than his ability to do it. Any last thoughts on that?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, good video. Yeah, powerful video. And I think it's encouraging when you think all teachers are trying this. This isn't just for a select few. This isn't just for the private schools in California, the public schools. We're looking at all students can have this capability and can do something along the way. So let's see where we are with this one. Okay, so I'm going to show you, to wind this segment up, I'm going to show you one last video. I believe it's the last video. Let me just check that I'm not lying to you. Okay. So this is going to be the class where I showed you the 2 boys. These are, in fact, one of the boys is in this interview. But you're going to listen to a 2nd grader. And this is by way of summing up all that we've been thinking about with respect to self-assessment and peer feedback and agency and that ability to manage your own learning and take responsibility. And I want you to listen to what this 2nd grade student says. And again, my question is, what stands out to you in this video clip? And she's in 2nd grade.
Someone tells you like what you did wrong, and when you reflect, you say what you need to do next time before you do it. So like when someone gives you feedback, which is your step, you could write that on when you reflect, and so it helps you know what you need to do next time.
What about you? How do you set your goals? Can you think about that? What goes on in your mind when you're doing it?
Could you say that again?
Well, when you're setting your own goal, I want to get an idea of how you think about setting a goal. What's in your mind? What's in your brain?
First, I would want to know which lab I go into or what I'm doing to set a goal for myself. What I need to do. So I think about that, and then once I know which one I'm going to, I start thinking about what I need to do at that lab, and then I write it as my goal.
And how do you know what you need to do at the lab?
So I like to collaborate with my research buddies.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, and then it really helps. And so it really helps me know, and so that's why I like to collaborate with people. So when I'm going to research lab sometimes, we go on the iPads and search up what we need if we don't have that answer. So we search it up, and then sometimes it each asks us a question that we don't know it. We each could take turns instead of just fighting over it.
Oh, excellent. Nice collaboration.
So that's how you could collaborate.
Mm-hmm.
Even sometimes kids could give teachers feedback too.
Who said it?
You got that last one? Sometimes kids can give teachers feedback too. So what do you all think? I mean, adorable, yeah, we can just, but let's get beyond the terminal adorability of the child. Go back to our 3 competencies, our 3 domains: cognitive, interpersonal, intrapersonal. I mean, where is that child on that journey?
She's got it all together.
She has.
Just the way she's sitting there.
The way she's sitting, I know. And you know what I think is really remarkable? I never interviewed these 3. I mean, the other 2 are good as well, but not as good as her. But she'd never seen me from Adam, this, or Eve rather, this child. And did you notice what she said? Could you repeat the question? Could you say that again? I mean, for a child, oh, but you missed a treat. Oh, you're going to be there tomorrow, so you'll see this tomorrow. How come you're going to be? Anyway, we'll find that out later. Poor Becky. I'll be expecting a lot of contributions from you tomorrow, Becky. You're on it, right? But the poise and the composure. And this teacher, once again, like the high school teacher, has been focused on agency through self-assessment, through peer feedback. And you can see, I mean, she gets quite emotional about the children, because she says, you know, when they go to 3rd grade, you know, they're taking with them something that will be with them for life. And I think we see it, right? We hear it. This is life. As you said, Jeannie, she's got it down. And in fact, the district where this school is, superintendent showed this to the school board. And the school board says, okay, what we want to know is, are our high schools ready for her? I mean, and they were serious. And I think they should be. Because can you imagine what she's going to be like in high school if this goes all the way through? And the other boys, I mean, they're not as terminally adorable as her, but you know, they say really powerful things. And what Jennifer Daniels, the teacher, says is this is spilled over into their own lives, that they now are taking initiatives, both in the school she came in. Jasleen came to the school, and she'd seen this thing about kids in some country not getting an education, girls, and she really wanted to do something. So she and her parents researched, and anyway, she's ended up sending a small amount of money periodically to this village to give girls an education. Now talk about agency and self-efficacy and all of that other good stuff. She's right there. But those 2 boys that you heard before giving each other feedback, Jasleen and the other, I can't remember his name, You know, they're all in the same class. That's how they've been brought up as learners in that class. So it should give us pause, folks, for second graders being able to think like that and set goals. And although she was using those big words, collaborate, reflect, feedback, they were all used appropriately. She knew what they meant, yeah, and she'd internalized them herself. So pretty amazing. So I will give you a, maybe I won't give you a break quite yet. I'm going to give you something else to do. So just to, you remember I did this chart for you with teachers who are expert in formative assessment. And we've been talking about students being an equal part of that process, equal stakeholders. And so if we look at those kids who are expert versus not expert, students who are expert are generating those personal feedback loops through their self-assessment, through the peer feedback. It's not something that necessarily has to be generated all the time by the teacher. So they generate these feedback loops. They set their own goals, like you heard Jasleen. They adapt their learning strategies. They make decisions about feedback, and you've seen all that. And they provide effective feedback to peers. And why I cited or suggested that this as a point of reference is that Zimmerman and Schunk write about self-regulation, self-regulated learning, academic self-regulation. In fact, I just published a book on academic self-regulation. Thank you very much. I should have come and waved my flyer at you. But this is where we're headed. This is what we need, self-regulated learners. Now, I would say that you have seen students do all of these in the videos. I will put that to you. However, look at this. Comply with teaching and learning directions, if we're lucky. So compliance. Complete assignments. Learning by assignments, learning by worksheets, learning by completing assignments after the teacher's talked at you. Making judgments about their learning based on a grade. And I'm here to tell you, folks, if you don't know already, this country is obsessed with grading. Obsessed. Obsessed with grading. And this is the saddest thing of all when I go around this great nation. The number of teachers that tell me, well, I have to give grades because if I don't, the kids won't do it. Now, what has that got to do with learning? What has it got to do with motivation? What has it got to do with these college and career-ready skills we've been talking about? If you only do it, I'm going to give you a grade. And I was talking to a guy from the University of Oregon, and I was saying this and moaning. He said, well, they've been saying not to think that. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, they've grown all the way through school, been given a grade for showing up, for sitting down, for doing their homework, for whatever. They get a grade. I am right. I'm always right, Hung. Yeah. There's nothing intrinsic in their motivation. They're not focused on learning. And going back to that girl from Julie's class who said, this is the first year I've actually focused on my learning. I really care about learning more than my grade. So this is the kind of shift we're trying to make from, and I mean, I know this is pretty harsh in the green box, but it's not really that harsh, to tell you the truth. It's not really. Because we see so much of that. I mean, I know that you folks over there who go into classrooms a lot, this is a lot of what you're going to see. It's not going to be the horizontal relationship, student to student, teacher to student. It's much more the vertical. And I'm giving you the grades for motivation. So we want to develop students who have expertise in formative assessment just as much as their teacher, so that they go into the world being able to self-regulate, to learn for themselves. But wait, is it against a rubric? Because at least if it's against a rubric, grades aren't even against a rubric. I don't know what they're against.
I guess maybe
Completely subjective based on the teacher giving the grade.
Absolutely, and they include things like, did you participate? It's not an academic. Is it your behavior? Is it your academic? oh, well, for him, he did well, so I gave him a B+, because for him it's good. Sorry. Well, because you want kids to focus on learning, because we want kids to have this. Now, am I an idiot? No. Contrary to popular belief, I am not. So I don't think that the universities are going to let us get away with grade-point GPAs. But at the same time, I mean, those kids in Julie's class are in an AP class. Jennifer's described her practice. You know, students are engaged in self-assessment, peer feedback, conversation, discussion, learning from each other. The kinds of building these competencies that are going to serve them well in the future. But you know what? From my experience, I've been principal of several schools, and I can tell you...
No, that's different.
No, I'm here to tell you, I've worked in some of the wealthiest communities and some of the poorest communities. And always the same, with a few notable exceptions, parents will come around if you can give them a reason why you should be doing it, why this is better for their child. Yeah, I think your point's well taken. I wasn't meaning comply with teaching learning directions in the sense of there should be no direct teaching. Of course there needs to be direct teaching. This was more about, to contrast with setting goals. There's no scope for kids to set their own goals because they're doing what the teacher told them all the time. That was the point. But I think the way you interpret it, it got us into thinking how you could meld the two. I mean, this, if it's going to be a grade, I don't want to call it measurement because it's not. It's an evaluation based on whatever criteria the teacher's got in their mind. But it comes at the end of learning. I mean, I think I mentioned it to you. I teach in one of my sessions recently. She said, an elementary teacher, I have to have 3 grades per week in my grade book for every subject. And I said, why? And she said, because the principal makes us. I said, but why? I don't know. Because the parents want it. That just sends me into a frenzy. Because the parents want it. But why? But why? Because they don't know any better. Because we haven't helped them understand any better. That's nice that you brought us all the way back to the beginning. That's very nice. And I think your point is really well taken. That it comes back, for everything, do you understand the content? Do you understand how kids learn that content? Can you derive a goal? Can you be specific about criteria? Can that be your gold standard? Can that be your star that you follow? Yeah. Well, I wish that, yeah, I do know what you're saying, but I want to push back on the idea of grading and challenge it, because grading isn't about a norm. It's not about a set of criteria even. It's about what teachers think. I mean, I'm not an expert in grading, but I know enough people who are. And I mean, if I could say crapshoot in public, I would, because that's what it is. You know, I won't call it measurement because it's not. It's an evaluation teachers make based on what teachers think. I mean, there may be a rubric, good, if there's a rubric and you're going to look at a final product based on a rubric and give a grade accordingly. But, you know, if there were more rigorous criteria and that a body of work was evaluated based on the criteria, then fair enough, that could be a useful grade. But I think one of the problems is, I mean, I hear what you're saying, Wendy, and I don't...
Well, it's kind of like a dilemma.
Yeah, it is a dilemma. Yeah, it is a dilemma.
But the rest of society is saying this is where it is.
Because it's always been like that. Yeah, but you see, we didn't know, we didn't have all this research on feedback or know the importance of feedback. We didn't really, it goes back to where I started, we didn't really care about self-regulation, academic self-regulation, but now we do. And so, as you say, it's a dilemma, because the society is not going to move away from grading until universities stop demanding GPAs. But at the same time, I think we've got to have sensible grading policies. And by the time you've got elementary teachers putting 3 grades in the grade book every week for every subject, then we've really lost the plot. So I don't know where I'm going with that, except to say I agree with you in the basic idea. Well, then at least that's more in the measurement realm than just saying, well, I'm going to give them a grade because, you know, X, Y, and Z. I mean, and that's what I would argue, that, you know, you need to evaluate a body of evidence, which is what you have in your portfolio. And if you need to stick a grade on it for the purposes of providing the powers that be and parents, yeah. Right. I think that's nice. Yes, it is. But I think it's useful to raise the spectre of grading, because this is one of the things that really gets in the way, and particularly in the public schools. And you know, it's a local decision. I mean, it can be changed. And so what I'm arguing for is sensible grading policies. And I want to go back to what Becky said by way of concluding this slide. I think the discussion's been great. And I just want to emphasize this is about going from everything being done to me taking control for myself in the interests of those competencies and actually more effective learning. So we are at clock slightly slow. So let's take a 6-minute break, just a stretch break, and we will finish earlier because we're having an earlier stretch break. And I'm going to put this at your desk. And when you come back, I want you to do a little self-reflection on strategies for teaching or for focusing on self-assessment, and then where are your areas of improvement for your class, and try and figure out one area of improvement at the very least. I know we're all getting very giddy. It's the end of the year, the end of the session, but we're going to focus because this is important now. This is continuing, how you're going to continue. So anyway, keep that in mind, and once you feel you've got your handouts, once you feel that you've focused on one area, you've improved it, then choose another one, and just so it goes. So what I want to end with now is, you know, you've started this journey. I think you've begun to implement some new things and refine some things you're already doing. And now I want to give you some tools to think about how you can keep moving forward. And I'll be sending them to Mark so he can post them on the website so you can have access to all of these. So you're seeing this hot off the press. This is actually hot off the press. I just finished a chapter over the weekend with a colleague, and we were asked to write a chapter for a handbook on formative assessment about, actually it was pre-service teaching, what you would do to start teachers on a continuum of professional growth. And so I just want to share this with you because I think it's good. Well, I would, wouldn't I? So knowledge of formative assessment practices, I mean, you've got that knowledge now. You know about goals and criteria. You know about evidence, getting evidence. You know about taking action, teacher, student, and so on. So it's a matter of continuing to refine that. You've got the basic knowledge, but now you want to refine it and become real experts. I'm going to give you a tool that can help you with that. The disciplinary knowledge, which we focused on, I really would encourage you to listen to the webinars. You know, when you've got nothing else to do in the summer, you think, oh, I'd like to revisit formative assessment. You've got the webinars because these guys did an absolutely outstanding job with locating in disciplinary knowledge. And so, and Charlie brought us right back to the, just before we broke, Charlie brought us right back to the, where we started this whole series of workshops, the deep and broad knowledge of the discipline, including how student learning develops in the discipline. And then the habits of practice that support professional learning, ongoing professional growth, inquiry, or inquiry to you, inquiry to me. The analytical reflection, the kinds of things we've been doing looking at other practice, how you can build that in. I mean, I know you do this already, but really thinking about using these tools. Collaboration. This work is hard to do on your own. The degree to which you can collaborate with colleagues. And then, of course, feedback. Feedback from your own internal feedback, from your reflections, but also peer feedback, getting peers to observe and give you feedback. So these are what we're calling in this chapter, these 3 domains of knowledge for successful formative assessment. So we don't have time for at your table, we don't have time for that. Okay, so see, if we hadn't done all that talking, we'd have had time for all these. So I'm going to share this with you. This is a, it's called the FAROP for short. It's using the formative assessment, rubrics, reflection, observation tools to support professional reflection on practice. Now, one of the things that you don't know about me is that when I'm not here, I'm actually I work for the Council of Chief State School Officers and run a state collaborative of state-level personnel focused on, I think I have told you about it, because I always say because California is not a member. And several years ago, we commissioned this protocol with funding from the Hewlett Foundation. Anything the Hewlett Foundation supports has to be open source. So this is available for all of you. And it was developed by two colleagues at ETS, Education Testing Service, who are experts in formative assessment. And it focuses on formative assessment dimensions, a rubric for those dimensions, and then opportunities for self-assessment and peer feedback. So you can use this for self-assessment, or you could use it asking a peer to come in and your classroom and say, okay, I want you to observe me giving feedback to students. Can you observe this? And then there's a whole protocol for how to do the observation, get a body of evidence, and provide feedback as to where the teacher you think your colleague is on these dimensions. And the whole idea here is supporting this notion of deliberate practice. And doing something over and over again doesn't necessarily make us an expert in something. You know, you might play the piano over and over again, you might play it a bit better, but it's not going to make you an expert. And so this notion of deliberate practice, and I don't know if you ever read anything by Daniel Willingham. So the idea here is with deliberate practice, that is you take an element, you know, like if you're a runner, you don't just keep running, you're going to work on how you get off the starting blocks, or you're going to work on your stride or whatever. So it's breaking down these components into manageable dimensions, so you can actually hone them and work on them and begin to put them all back together. So the idea of the FAROP, this rubric, is the same. And I'm going to ask Mark to post it. And so what we do with this, where am I headed, where am I now, and how do I close the gap? So the same idea for teachers using this. So where you're headed is obviously the higher levels of the rubric. Where you are now is your self-reflection or your peer feedback. And then how do you close the gap? So there's actually development plans. So it's a big chunky document, but actually when we first developed it, people said to me, nobody will ever use that. Well, guess what? People really are using it, and guess what? Practice is improving. There are 10 dimensions, which you should all know about. They break them out. Extending thinking during discourse, I think, is a good one. That we haven't necessarily talked about, but we focused on all of these. So if you're thinking, I really want to work on self-assessment or descriptive feedback, you can use these rubrics to help you. There's a parallel structure to each rubric. 4 levels: beginning, developing, progressing, extending, and a separate category for what I like here is Caroline Wiley, one of the authors. She talked about a lethal mutation where formative assessment is entirely lost. And you know what? There's lots of lethal mutations out there. So if you choose to use this, and I would really encourage you to do it because there's an awful lot of benefit from it, you can read across the dimensions, across the scale rather, shows you what's changing as to the quality. And then once you get to the extending, you can begin to focus on really high levels of implementation and how you can refine that. We have these rubric clusters with the dimensions, and I won't spend too much time on this, but where are we headed? So that's the learning goals and success criteria. Those are 2 dimensions under that. The supportive learning context, that's the collaborative culture for learning, that's another dimension. where are we now, tasks and activities, questioning strategies and self-assessment for the where are we now, and then how to close the gap, extending thinking, descriptive feedback, and peer feedback. So you see how we end up with these 3 dimensions. So I'm going to skip this. Okay, so one of the other ways, so that's the FAROP, so you're going to have access to that. And like I said, we've had several implementations across the country now, and early evidence suggests that it does make an impact. So if you're really interested in doing this work and continuing, and I think this is going to be useful for you subject matter folks as well in your work. We'd love to, we don't have enough money, but we'd love to make it subject specific, but you can do that. Okay, so that's one resource to continue your learning. Chapter 8 in the book is all about using professional learning communities to develop and deepen formative assessment practice. And so what the chapter focuses on is working on developing goals, improving questioning. You can do a book study. I mean, I'm always happy for you to buy more copies of my book and do a book study on it. You can do a lesson study. You know, the kind of thing that Hung brought. That would be a great professional learning community focus to really go over the lesson, what worked, what didn't work, what would you refine. Sharing student work is always valuable, and strategies for involving students. So those are some of the aspects in Chapter 8. And I co-authored Chapter 8 with actually one of the authors of the protocol. So there's lots of ideas in that chapter for how you can continue to do this work. And then this, I need to get out of this. This was something that was adapted from the FAROP for an implementation in several districts funded by the Michael and Susan Dell Foundation. And I will make this available to you because I really like it. And I don't like much of what other people do, but I like this quite a bit. Well, usually they make such a mess of it. Oh, now where is it? I had it here. I had it already open. Oh, no, I know. I've got it down here. So here's the FAROP. That's going to go on the website for you. You can see it's 86 pages, but I do think it's worth why use the tool, and then the teacher self-reflection form, and then peer observation. So it's a really, really good resource. So you're going to have that. This I like. So the 10 dimensions I showed you. This will be on your website. So they took the 10 dimensions of the FAROP, and what I think is nice, the way they did it, is they have actually identified what the students do with respect to each of those. So teachers identify lesson size learning goals that should be clearly identified and communicated to students and should help students make connections among lessons within a larger sequence. And then we have what the students do. Engage with learning goals so they understand the intended learning and are prepared to interact with the content. Refer to the learning goals at various times throughout the lesson as they check their progress. So I think they did a very nice job of connecting what the students do to what the teacher's doing. And so we've got extended thinking, descriptive feedback, and so on. So this is another resource for you. As you're focusing, maybe you decide I'm going to focus on descriptive feedback. Okay, so let me think about that, what happens to kids when I'm focused on that. So, and you can see it says adapted from our FAROP. I thought they did a really good job with that. So that's another resource I'm going to give you.
Was that in Chapter 8?
No, that's new. This is from the Michael and Susan Dell Foundation work. Yeah, no, it's not in Chapter 8. Chapter 8, where I just did specifically that you could focus on various things. And then this one, this is both Julie, the AP teacher, Jessica Cull, who you heard in the beginning, you know, trying to figure out her practice, and the teacher with the children doing peer feedback, and Jasleen with her goals and her research buddies. What I did for this was, you know, it's quite nice the reading, but I used the FAROP idea, reading across the levels, but focused on the student. So what you have here, if you read this, it references the different rows and what they're intended to support. And this is, if you're thinking about, yeah, I'm going to really focus on student feedback, peer feedback. You can see how along here, limited structured occasions to support students providing and using feedback to powerful structured occasions. Look at this one. Students can justify the feedback they provide to peers, e.g., what evidence in your learning and or work related to the goal and criteria I used to give you this feedback, and why I think this feedback will strengthen and improve your learning and your work. So that's another tool I'm going to give you, and it also has a rubric for self-assessment. So this is for you to actually focus on what the students are doing. This isn't for the students, this is for you, but the focus is on the students. And you'll see here, there's the first line is always about what are the structures you've put in place. So this is another tool that I'll make available to you. So don't say I never give you anything, because I do. So I was going to ask you to do this, but we're running out of time. But at least I want you to think about this. If you've thought about this in relation to self-assessment now, if you were going to do one thing, if you were going to commit to one thing, and this is just for you, final reflection, leaving this session, what would it be? We're not going to share it out, just think about it. If you were to give me a piece of paper that said, I am going to be focusing on this, and I were to check up with you in September, would I see this in action? So let's come up, because you know we've spent 3 whole days together. It's a lot, but I've really enjoyed working with you. I must say this has been my favorite group, even though you have been a pain in the neck. You have been my absolute favorite group. Just great. Just the energy and the commitment and the willingness to think and be open and think outside the box and grapple with challenging ideas. I've really appreciated you guys. You've been great. I'm going to miss you. Especially in Dave's position, who, you know, Dave, like, I know everything. I'm the expert. So, yeah, so it's nice. He does. But thank you for saying that, Jennifer. But I think this group has been very honest in terms of, you know, like Wendy challenging the grading and pushing back. I think this group has been very honest, and you know, I've certainly appreciated that and enjoyed it, even though it has meant getting up at 4:30 and trailing up here. It's been a pleasure. It really has. So I want you to know that. So by way of summing up, then, again, this is a quote from my book, and I think this, to me, sums up the kind of changes and the benefits that occur when formative assessment. And these are Sean's underlinings. And he says, I used to do a lot of explaining, but now I do a lot of questioning. I used to do a lot of talking, but now I do a lot of listening. I used to think about teaching the curriculum, but now I think about teaching the student. And you know, going back to Jennifer's point about being honest and showing where you are, I mean, that is a 180 in terms of what Sean did, and I think you can see it. And that was after about a year of working on this. So to really sum up this session, and the whole 3 sessions, in the process of formative assessment, really the lines between instruction, assessment, and learning blur. I mean, I think if you were to say to a non-tutored eye, okay, so show me formative assessment in these classrooms. All the examples I've shown you have been fully integrated and embedded into learning, into the lesson, which is another reason why people shouldn't think it's one more thing. It's actually doing what you're doing, but refining it, elevating it, getting better at doing it. Oh, sorry, there should be 2 R's on blur, right? That doesn't look right to me. Is it right? Looks wrong. Okay. So formative assessment can improve the learning for all students. So this isn't for a privileged few. This is for everybody, including, as we've seen, our students with significant cognitive disabilities. It's everybody is included in this pot, not just a few, because it does improve the learning of all students. Students who generate evidence to assess their own learning, they make learning happen. You know, they're taking charge, they're moving forward on their own. They can do it. And they'll continue to make it happen as they move through school and beyond school. I mean, think about Jasleen, that little girl. Hey, be ready for her. And when they're partners in the process, they can develop those all-important learning to learn skills. When we invite them into the process and engage them as legitimate stakeholders who have a stake in the game, and it's their game. And once again, to underscore that that game is played when the relationships in the classroom change from the vertical to the horizontal and children are invited in. And we know that practice makes perfect. I should put deliberate practice makes perfect. Not just doing it, repeating the same thing over and over again, but deliberate practice. And so, you know, I think the value of formative assessment is very much known in the field. It's worth working on. It's worth using the tools and continuing to refine what you do and grow. And here are your success criteria for this session. Can you talk about learning to learn skills and how formative assessment can assist students? Can you explain how students can be supported to engage in self-assessment and peer feedback? And can you identify ways in which you're going to continue your journey? I think you've made that. And I hope Mark's going to watch this one, because this goes right to what Mark's been saying. Rome wasn't built in a day, but they were laying bricks every hour. So that speaks to that incremental, just refining small steps. Choosing one thing that you were already doing and you think, I can do this better. Or introducing something that you're not doing because you think it's going to be valuable and support learning. So take those little steps, use those little, use the tools that I've given you. And so just to say thank you for being a great group. I've really enjoyed working with you. And all my insults were meant with love and affection, just so you know.